Chapter 1205. In the eyes of Xixi and Lu Xiaoyu, breaking two Teru dolls was a serious matter that was difficult to make up for. However, after hearing Xixi's sad story, Yang Yi smiled in relief. I thought it was something serious. He rubbed the head of the little girl in his arms and said with a smile, if you encounter something that you can't solve, you have to tell Daddy. How can you be sad in your room? Daddy is so capable, so I can definitely solve it for you, right? Xixi's eyes were watery as she looked up at her father with tears in her eyes. She pouted and asked, Daddy, but what should I do? Although you're very kind and you're willing to help your good friend even when you're sad, your performance is very good. Daddy wants to praise you. However, we actually have a better idea. Yang Yi smiled and said, it's very simple. If little Er's two Teru dolls are broken, we can just buy another pair of Teru dolls for her, right? Xixi rubbed her eyes. She seemed to have regained some energy. She asked softly, but Daddy, big sister Xiaowei bought them in Yangcheng. Also, they have to be exactly the same. That way, big sister Xiaowei won't be sad when she sees them. They have to be exactly the same? That's a little difficult. However, Yang Yi still had to face the difficulty head-on. He rubbed his chin and thought for a while. Then he smiled and said, all right, you go take a shower first. Leave this matter to Daddy. In 2 days, maybe next week, I promise I'll bring you two Teru dolls that look exactly the same. After receiving her father's promise, Xixi's mood instantly brightened up like the sky after the rain. The little girl looked as if she had already received a new Teru doll. She hugged her father happily and replied sweetly, MHM. Daddy is so awesome. Yay. Then, without even wiping away her tears, the little girl ran into the bathroom like the wind with a string of laughter. Yang Yi shook his head gently and smiled. He picked up the blue Teru dolls that Xixi put down and examined them carefully. However, at this moment, Xixi screamed and ran out of the bathroom. Just like when she ran in, she had wiped her tears clean and had a happy smile on her little face. When she realized that her father had seen her, she giggled embarrassedly. She shook her little butt and said to her father, oh, I forgot to bring my clothes. The next morning on the subway in Yangcheng, Zhong Zhenjin, who had already graduated with a master's degree and started working at a public institution, stretched her arms and yawned. Then, she lazily leaned against the glass partition of the seat by the door. It was the morning rush hour, and the subway was as crowded as sardines. Zhong Zhenjin was fine. Although she did not have a seat, she still occupied a comfortable spot to stand. However, she had to carefully protect the breakfast in her left hand. She was afraid that the 2 pieces of bread and soy milk, especially the soy milk, would be crushed by the crowd. She was still not used to working from 9 to 5, but she had no choice. Life was like this. After coming out of the ivory tower, she could no longer play around freely like before. She had to face reality. Sometimes Zhong Zhenjin would tease her best friend, Chu Fangfang, who was still pursuing her Ph.D. So what if you graduated with a master's degree? You still have to squeeze into the subway, don't you? Zhong Zhenjin saw that there were still 7 stops before her workplace, so she picked up her phone and started playing with it out of boredom. Zhong Zhenjin saw that Yang Yi had posted a new micro-broadcasting post in the middle of the night. Out of curiosity, she clicked on it and read the entire post. Emergency. Omnipotent voting circles and micro-broadcasting fans. Who knows where to buy the Teru Bozu in the photo below? We urgently need a pair of Teru Bozu that look exactly like the one in the photo. The measurements are as follows. XXmm tall, XXmm wide. Apparently they were bought in Guangzhou. Friends from Guangzhou, please keep an eye out for them. If you have any leads, please send me a private message. The friend who can help us find them first will be rewarded handsomely. The beginning of Yang Yi's micro-broadcasting post was quite interesting. It was Zhong Zhenjin's first time seeing such a form of address, so she looked at it with interest for a while. Of course, the content of the micro-broadcasting post was the most important. Zhong Zhenjin was surprised to see that Yang Yi had listed out the detailed measurements of every part of the Teru Bozu. Moreover, from the comments below, although some netizens couldn't wait to find some pictures and purchase links of the Teru Bozu from the Sahara Taobao Mall, and sent them to Yang Yi, they were all rejected by Yang Yi. No, there's a difference between XXX and XXX parts. It seemed like Yang Yi really wanted to find the exact same Tera Bozu. Zhong Zhenjin didn't know that if it was possible to buy the exact same ones from the Sahara Taobao Mall, Yang Yi wouldn't have needed to post this micro-broadcasting post. Yang Yi had already hit a wall, so he changed to another solution, using the power of his fans. However, when Zhong Zhenjin looked at the picture with interest, she couldn't help but be stunned. They look so familiar. She really had seen this pair of Tera Bozu before. They were sold on a pedestrian street in Guangzhou. However, when she saw this pair of Tera Bozu, Zhong Zhenjin couldn't help but recall some sad memories. That scumbag, when I was shopping in the past, I hinted that this pair of Tera Bozu was very cute, but he didn't take it to heart. Zhong Zhenjin complained in her heart. However, she wasn't sure if that small stall was still open on that pedestrian street after a year and a half, and if that stall owner was still selling the exact same Tera Bozu. At noon, Zhong Zhenjin found an excuse to sneak out in advance and headed straight for the pedestrian street. Although she didn't really care about the generous returns Yang Yi mentioned, when she saw Yang Yi's rare eagerness in replying to netizens' comments in the comments section, and even saying that he was buying them for Shishi, Zhong Zhenjin was motivated. Shishi is so cute, I'll definitely help you find that pair of Tera Bozu. A year and a half had passed, and the memories that could be forgotten were already sparse. Zhong Zhenjin bought some pastries and snacks on the pedestrian street for lunch. As she ate, she looked for the location of that small stall. Here. As expected, I forgot. How is this a small stall? It's a boutique. Zhong Zhenjin was pleasantly surprised to find that boutique, and she also found the Tera Bozu in the store as she wished. They should be the exact same, right? Zhong Zhenjin took out her phone to compare. She felt that they were very similar, but she had never measured them with a ruler before, and there was no ruler here for her to compare them with. However, she was certain based on a woman's sixth sense. This should be it. Since they weren't expensive, Zhong Zhenjin bought 3 pairs. She was going to send 2 pairs to Yang Yi and keep the other pair for herself. A year and a half had passed, and her feelings for that man had faded. However, Zhong Zhenjin still liked this Tera Bozu that she had never gotten before. On the bus, Zhong Zhenjin took a photo of the Tera Bozu and sent it to Yang Yi through a private message. Unexpectedly, just as she returned to the office sleepily and tiredly, Yang Yi's private message came back. Yes, this should be it. Friend, thank you very much. Please give me the address. I'll send a Sahara Express courier to pick it up in the afternoon. Zhong Zhenjin instantly lost her sleepiness. She looked at the private message in surprise and was speechless for a long time. After a while, in the unit's toilet, a woman excitedly stomped her feet in the cubicle like a madwoman. Her voice was so low that it was almost squeezed out. Wow, Yang Yi replied to me. I'm so happy. Chapter 1206. Yang Yi asked his fans to help him find the Tera dolls. Shishi and Lu Xiaoyu did not need to share a pair of Tera dolls with each other. When the 2 girls received the new Tera dolls, they were so happy that they spent the entire weekend walking and jumping around while humming a tune. To the 2 girls, this incident was just a small interlude in their growth. However, because Yang Yi's request for help on micro-broadcasting was quite interesting, the entertainment media all used a small section to report on this news. The news of Yang Yi helping his children find Tera dolls on micro-broadcasting was not particularly popular, but after some netizens cited it and started using phrases like omnipotent voting circle and omnipotent micro-broadcasting netizens, it unexpectedly became popular. A lot of people even followed the trend and used it without knowing that Yang Yi was the one who started it. For a time, they had the potential to become the internet word of the year. Of course, Yang Yi, the person who started this, did not pay attention to the subsequent developments, because he focused all his attention on Shishi learning piano. Obviously, learning piano was something that seemed beautiful but was actually very boring. Don't think that just because Shishi was so obedient, she would patiently continue learning. For the first 2 days, Shishi still sat in front of the piano very seriously, listening to her father correct her posture, learning some fingering techniques, and even listening to her father explain some complicated musical notation techniques. The little girl was still able to listen attentively. However, starting from the weekend, Shishi's laziness started to show. The little girl started to feel that learning piano was no longer fun, and she found all sorts of excuses to avoid the lessons that day. For example, on Saturday night, the little girl who had just finished bathing was like a little bunny, lying on the bed like a pancake. She said coquettishly, "Papa, can I not learn piano today? Because I feel so tired, am I going to fall sick?" The little girl was probably not very good at lying, so she stuttered. Sick. Yang Yi still believed that the little girl had caught a cold when she was swimming with Lan Xian at Lan Xian's house today. Originally, she was supposed to practice piano in the afternoon on weekends, but today, because Lan Xian said that she wanted to swim, she changed it to the evening. Yang Yi walked over worriedly and touched the little girl's forehead. Then he picked up Shishi's wrist to check her pulse. Shishi had clearly miscalculated. She didn't know that her father knew about these things. The little girl was lying on the bed, her hair flowing out like a black waterfall, covering a large part of the bed. The little girl tilted her head and looked at her father with a trace of expectation in her delicate eyes. After Yang Yi confirmed that there was no problem, he couldn't help laughing. He reached out and rubbed Shishi's little head and said with a smile, "Get up quickly. Are you sick? If you are sick, it is because you are lazy." When Shishi realized that her father had exposed her, she immediately lowered her head in embarrassment. Her body was like a piece of wood, and she turned left and right on the bed, whining coquettishly. But no matter how coquettishly she acted, in the end, Shishi still didn't get her father's concession. She obediently got up and went to practice piano with her father. On Sunday afternoon, Shishi's laziness came up with a new trick. Yang Yi had told her that she had to start piano practice at 4:00 p.m. for an hour. The little girl came down from upstairs at 3:45 p.m. with her drawing board. "Little brother, don't move. Big sister is going to draw for you." Shishi pulled Lil Tigress onto a small stool in front of the drawing board, then stuffed one of Lil Tigress' toys into his arms and said, "Draw." Tong Tong knew what drawing was, but he was curious and stretched his neck to see what his sister was doing. Of course, Tong Tong couldn't see through the drawing board. He hugged his toy, stood up, and moved his short legs to walk behind his sister. His little mouth was slightly open, and he looked like a curious baby. "You can't move." Shishi quickly pulled Tong Tong back and whispered, "Little brother, can you sit still? Big sister is going to draw for you. You can only look at it after I finish drawing." Okay. Tong Tong agreed loudly. But after a while, the little guy couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up and jumped around before his sister pushed him back. When it was almost 4:00 p.m., Yang Yi came over and saw Shishi on the drawing board, working hard to sketch Tong Tong. "Shishi, it's time to learn how to play the piano. Wait a while. You can play after you finish learning," Yang Yi said gently. Shishi pouted and unwillingly sat on the small bench where she was drawing. She twisted around and said, But I'm drawing for my little brother. I haven't finished drawing yet." "You can draw after a while." Yang Yi smiled and gently placed his hand on Shishi's shoulder. He said, "Daddy is going to teach you how to play the piano for an hour, and then I'm going to make dinner. If I'm late, Xian won't be able to eat. But I won't be able to draw after a while. Little brother won't listen to me and won't sit here." Shishi held the pencil in her hand and looked at her father pitifully. Tong Tong sat on the small bench in front of them and looked at his sister and father with a confused expression. He didn't know why they suddenly mentioned that he was disobedient. He was quite obedient, wasn't he? How could he not listen to his sister? Tong Tong liked his sister the most. Fortunately, Tong Tong only blinked his big round eyes in confusion and didn't say anything to undermine his sister. Yang Yi smiled and said in a gentle tone that was easier for children to accept, "But there's still a problem. If you don't learn how to play the piano with Daddy now, you'll still have to learn how to play the piano with Daddy for an hour after you finish drawing. In that case, we'll have to eat very late because Daddy will have to teach you and won't have time to prepare dinner. Don't you think so? Not only will Xian and you be hungry, but we won't be able to watch the cartoon after dinner." Shishi could understand this logic, but the little girl didn't want to learn how to play the piano for so long. She pouted unhappily and asked, "But, Daddy, can we not learn how to play the piano for an hour? After I finish drawing, we can learn until 5 o'clock. Can we?" The little girl held her father's hand and begged with a pitiful expression. This girl was beginning to learn how to play the piano like Lan Xian. However, Yang Yi wasn't Lan Zhoukai or Wu Jingjing. He didn't lose his temper at Xixi, but remained patient and continued to reason with Xixi. He said in a gentle voice, "This is like doing homework. If you don't finish your homework, the teacher will criticize you. It's the same with playing the piano. We still have to learn for an hour. Don't you think so?" Xixi wasn't Lan Xian. Although the little girl acted coquettishly with her father for a while, under her father's gentle guidance, she obediently put down the pencil and said, "Oh, okay. Then, little brother, I'll draw for you later." Although Yang Yi and Xixi fought a battle of wits and courage in order to learn how to play the piano for half an hour or an hour every day, he gradually began to reflect on his teaching method. Should he slow down the speed of teaching theory? Although knowledge of music theory and music notation were important, they were too boring for a 7-year-old girl after all. Yang Yi felt that he should give priority to cultivating Xixi's interest in piano and music. For example, he could play some beautiful and simple songs for Xixi to listen to, or even let her try to learn. With a sense of accomplishment, perhaps she would be more motivated. Chapter 1207. Since he had thought of changing the teaching method, Yang Yi did not intend to drag it out. He guided Xixi for a while, and asked her to repeatedly play the simplest theme of the variations on Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. After that, he clapped his hands with a smile and said, "Well, it's 4:30 now. There's still half an hour left today." There's still half an hour left. Xixi turned to look at her father. After hearing the first half of her father's words, her shoulders sank in melancholy as she muttered in a low voice. But soon, her father's next words made Xixi's spirits rise again. "But what about the next half an hour? We'll make a small change. That is, Daddy will play the piano. Then you can sit beside Daddy and observe Daddy's fingering when he plays the piano. Listen to Daddy's music carefully, okay?" How could it not be good? She didn't even need to play the piano herself. This was equivalent to not letting Lan Xian do the remaining half of her homework. She just needed to sit by the side and watch others do it. It was simply an opportunity for her father to be lazy. Xixi was so happy that she immediately puffed out her small chest and nodded her small head vigorously. Yes, okay. Don't be happy so early." Yang Yi smiled and gently rubbed the little girl's head. "You have to watch and listen carefully by the side. It doesn't mean that you can be lazy and go play elsewhere." Xixi had already returned to her usual lively state. She grabbed her father's hand, giggled, and said mischievously, "I know. I also want to clap for Daddy, hee." Yang Yi changed positions with Xixi. However, he was not in a hurry to play the piano. Instead, he turned to Xixi, who was holding a small cup and drinking water, and said softly, "Xixi, do you know why Daddy wants to learn to play the piano?" Xixi asked curiously, "Why?" "That's because the piano is a magical instrument. It's like a magic wand in the hands of ordinary people. It allows you to convey wonderful emotions to others." Yang Yi touched the piano devoutly, then looked at Xixi and said with a smile, "So Dad hopes that you learn to play the piano because you have the same wish as Dad. To be able to play good music and then be able to express your inner feelings more thoroughly. It's because of this that I want to work hard to play the piano well. And not like doing homework, in order to cope with my father's supervision, in order to cope with half an hour, or an hour, making me very unhappy to learn the piano." Yang Yi's words were not complicated, but the little girl looked a little confused. Yang Yi smiled gently. He didn't plan to get any feedback from Xixi right away, so he said softly, "Let's listen to a more relaxing song." Before he finished speaking, Yang Yi began to gently play the opening part of the song. The first part was repeated. Yang Yi's thick and long fingers were as dexterous as ripples on the surface of the water, gently rolling on the white piano keys. The main theme was cut into very quickly as well. Thump thump, thump thump thump, thump 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 thump. A series of similar notes were strengthened, and the music seemed to have become lighter all of a sudden, giving people a feeling of joy as if they had seen something wonderful. That's right, Yang Yi was playing Adelina by the Water, a piano piece that almost everyone knew. Although it was a relatively simple piece and not a classic that had been passed down for many years, after all, it was a work composed in the late part of the last century. It was very well known. It was precisely because it was simple and pleasant that many people, regardless of whether they were piano enthusiasts or not, liked it. The reason why Yang Yi chose Adelina by the Water was of course because of its simplicity. He believed that even a beginner like she could appreciate the beauty of its melody. Sure enough, Yang Yi saw from the corner of his eye that she was sitting on a small chair at the side, listening attentively. Although the little girl didn't show an intoxicated expression, she didn't care about putting the cup down. She just held it with her two small hands and watched her father's hands play with rapt attention. Yang Yi's fingers were much thicker than Murphy's. In the past, they used to carry farm tools and hold rifles, but on the black and white piano keys, they were as light and elegant as a butterfly. She looked at her father's fingers with a little obsession. She saw them go up and down on the piano keys easily, as if they were dancing, and the beautiful melody was also very beautiful. It took about 3 minutes to play a complete song. After Yang Yi took his hands off the piano keys, he smiled gently and asked Shi, "How was it?" The little girl came back to her senses with great difficulty, and soon looked at her father's face with admiration. She pouted and said, "Papa, you're so good. Playing the piano is so beautiful. Even I'm not as good as you." Yang Yi laughed. He gently pressed a string of notes on the piano keys with his fingers, and then said with a smile, "It took a long time of practice to reach Dad's level now. Of course, if you continue to practice hard in the future, you will definitely be as good as Dad." Next, Yang Yi explained the name of the song to Shi, and even talked about the Greek myth. Although it took a little time, it was obvious that with the myth connecting the dots, Shi's interest became stronger. "Next, let's play a simple and beautiful song, okay?" Yang Yi said to Shi with a smile. "This song has a very beautiful story. A long time ago, there was a very kind girl named Alice. Of course, this is not the Alice who fell into the rabbit hole. This is another beautiful and kind girl, just like our Shi, beautiful and kind." Cici was originally listening attentively, but when she suddenly heard her father praising her for being beautiful and kind, the little girl was stunned for a moment. Then she giggled happily. She held the glass of water and twisted her little butt on the chair in embarrassment. Alice met an old man who couldn't see in both eyes. The old man told Alice that he wanted to see the beautiful forest and the vast sea. Alice was very kind. She helped the old man look for help everywhere, but there was no doctor who could cure his eyes. Just when Alice was feeling sad for the old man, a pianist appeared. He said to Alice, "Let me play a song for you." She listened attentively. There was a trace of nervousness and sadness in her bright, beautiful obsidian-like eyes. It seemed that she was also worried about Alice and the old man. Yang Yi gently pressed the strings of the piano. The classic and beautiful melody of "To Alice" sounded. After the repetition of the first part, the song began to enter the graceful and gentle part of the emotional expression. It was as if the two of them were having an intimate conversation. However, Yang Yi interspersed the story with the story that was even more moving. The old man closed his eyes and listened to the music played by the pianist. Suddenly, tears flowed out of his eyes because in the music, he heard towering, continuous snow-capped mountains. He also heard the blue sea in his hometown. It was boundless and sparkling. There were seagulls flying in the sky. In the distance, there were forests and sunshine accompanying him. Yang Yi's voice stopped at some point, but the melody of the piano was still flowing in Shi's ears. The little girl looked at her father piously. The vast and blue sea seemed to be reflected in her beautiful big eyes. Chapter 1208. When Cici was learning the piano with her father, in order not to let little Momo disturb her sister's piano practice, Fei took him to the second floor and played the game of looking at pictures and learning pronunciation with the little guy. Of course, she also taught little Momo how to speak, but little Momo still liked to play games. It was worth mentioning that although the soundproofing effect of the room was good, because the location of the side hall happened to be directly below Fei and Yang Yi's bedroom, Some of the magic music played by Cece occasionally came upstairs. Not knowing how much time had passed, Murphy changed a new card, but he couldn't help but listen carefully. Watermelon, it's watermelon, Tong Tong said excitedly. But his mother did not seem to be doing anything. Tong Tong looked at his mother in confusion. He threw himself forward, stretched out his chubby little arm, and pressed his palm on the card in his mother's hand. He pointed at the red tomato and said in his childish voice, "It's watermelon. Mom, watermelon." Mo Fei came back to her senses. She put away the card, rubbed little mommy's head with a smile, and said, "Let's play later. Papa seems to be playing the piano. Let's go and listen to Papa play the piano, okay?" The faint sound of the piano came from downstairs. The rhythm was light, the melody was beautiful, and the music was seamless. Obviously, it was not something a beginner like Shishi could play. When Murphy recognized it, she was puzzled. Why was Yang Yi playing the piano by himself? Wasn't Shishi practicing? However, Murphy was a music lover. After listening carefully for a while, she put her question aside and could not help but listen carefully to the song Yang Yi was playing. Tong Tong did not feel neglected. When he heard his mother say that they were going downstairs, he immediately grabbed the bedsheet happily and slipped down from the bed. He stretched out his little hand to his mother, and could not wait for his mother to hold his hand and go downstairs together. Yang Yi had finished telling the story and was playing to Alice with his fingers when he heard the movement behind him. As he played blindly, he turned around to take a look. Murphy and Yang Yi looked at each other and smiled warmly. They knew each other's personalities and preferences very well. Yang Yi didn't need to say anything, nor did he need to make any arrangements. He just played the piano more energetically, because he knew that Mo Fei liked to listen to him play new songs. And Mo Fei also stood quietly on the side. She didn't want to take a chair to sit down, because she didn't want to make a little noise and disturb Yang Yi's performance of a beautiful piano piece that she had never heard before. On the other hand, when Cece saw her brother approaching, she didn't continue to listen piously like her mother. Instead, she giggled and waved to her brother. She lowered her voice and said, "Brother, come and sit here." Little Momo was forcefully pulled by her sister to sit on her own chair. Although her pants were pulled down by the chair, revealing a portion of her white buttocks, little Momo only scratched and didn't pull up her pants properly. She beamed with joy as she looked at her sister. There was not much left of to Alice, and Yang Yi quickly finished playing. He gently withdrew his hand and asked with a smile, "Do you want to continue?" Cece, on the other hand, couldn't hold it in any longer. She hugged her brother's shoulder with one arm to prevent him from falling. At the same time, she chattered to her mother, "Mama, let me tell you, the song Papa played with me has a very magical story." Murphy was a little strict. She put up a finger and interrupted Shishi's narration. She said softly, "You can't talk when your papa is teaching you." Shishi pouted a little gloomily. Seeing this, Yang Yi laughed loudly and pulled Cece's depressed mood. He said, "When learning the piano, sometimes it's not just about playing the piano. We also use the piano as an accompaniment. Just like when my mother held a concert in the past, my father would also play the accompaniment for my mother on stage. Or you can play and sing by yourself. This is also very interesting. There is still some time before 5 o'clock. Shishi, Dad will show you a song, okay?" Shishi blinked and suddenly became energetic again. She nodded to her father with great interest and said, "Okay. I want to hear Papa sing." "Then come on. This song is called Snail." It is sung for Shishi, who is also working hard to learn the piano. Yang Yi almost imitated the tone of Princess Zhou in his previous life and said snail. He nodded to Shishi with a smile, then pressed his right hand on the piano key and gently played the prelude. Although there were no chords, Yang Yi's handling showed Shishi and Murphy a clear and gentle melody. It was like a clean sky, and in their hearts, a bird began to fly to the melody and began to dance under the blue sky. After the prelude, Yang Yi's left hand also began to play the chords. However, his fingers were gentle and the piano sound slowed down. He softly sang, "Should I put down the heavy shell and search for where the blue sky is? Floating with the gentle wind, I don't feel the pain after experiencing the pain." Dad began to sing, and Shishi also began to listen carefully. On the other hand, Tong Tong probably felt a little uncomfortable with his butt exposed. He began to move a little, but he was not as strong as his sister. Shishi held him tightly in her arms and did not let him disturb Dad's singing. Tong Tong could not move. Yang Yi turned his head. His fingers were still playing the piano accurately. He used a little strength to push the melody to the peak. He gently gestured to Shishi, raised his eyebrows slightly, and gently sang with a little smile. I want to climb up step by step, waiting for the sun to quietly look at its face. The small sky has a big dream, wrapped in a heavy shell, gently looking up. This song was originally accompanied by the piano. Of course, Yang Yi purposely took it out because the lyrics of this song were very suitable for the current mood. Although Yang Yi would not continue to talk to Shishi about many boring principles, all his expectations were contained in these simple lyrics. Shishi should be able to understand because the little girl's eyes were focused on Dad. She was listening very seriously. Of course, regardless of whether Shishi could understand or not, Yang Yi saw the little girl gently shaking her head as she listened with a happy smile on her little face. She was able to experience happiness from listening to music with Dad, Mom, and little brother. Presumably, she would like music even more in the future. With interest, there was no need to worry about lack of motivation. Yang Yi sang over and over again. At the end of the song, Murphy was smiling and humming along with Yang Yi. However, at this moment, the doorbell in the living room suddenly rang. Steamed Bun, who was lying on the side, unknowingly ran to the door and looked outside while wagging his tail. Without guessing, Yang Yi knew that Lan Xian was here. She was waiting outside the courtyard to open the door. I'll go open the door for Xian air. She still couldn't sit still. She giggled and left Tong Tong on the chair. She jumped down and ran out with light steps like a gust of wind. In fact, she didn't need to run out to open the iron gate of the courtyard. She could just remote control it, but she still went out to greet her. Yang Yi couldn't help but stop playing the piano. He and Murphy looked at each other. The two of them couldn't help but shake their heads with a wry smile. Outside, the conversation between Shishi and Lan Xian was soon heard. My papa is playing a song for me. Then my mom and little brother are also here. Shishi happily said to Lan Xian. What's a sugar pigeon? Is it delicious? Lan Xian asked puzzledly. No, it's playing the piano. Then my papa can also sing. Shishi quickly explained. Without waiting for Lan Xian to speak, Shishi smiled happily and said, Hee Xianair, let me tell you, I can sing soon. Listen. I want to climb up step by step, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. Hee, I forgot the lyrics later. The little girl really sang, but later, she became mischievous again. Lan Xian's voice appeared at the door of the villa. But Father Yang didn't cook? What about our dinner? Chapter 1209. In the middle of October, Huijia Primary School would hold a one-day open house for parents. At that time, parents would be invited to the school. On the one hand, they could visit the school and understand the children's learning and living environment in depth. On the other hand, they could accompany the children in class, experience the teaching environment at close range, and understand the children's learning situation. In addition to 1 or 2 normal classes, the school would also arrange physical education classes, music classes, and so on, so that parents could see the children's lively figures outside of the classroom. However, the most anticipated finale was the cultural performance held in the school's gymnasium in the afternoon. The children would bring wonderful performances for their parents. Of course, this would happen a month later. The children didn't have to worry about whether their parents' arrival would lead to the discovery of their little secrets. However, the preparation for the cultural performance for the parents' open house had to start now. After returning home from school that day, Shishi talked to her father in the car. The teacher said that we have to prepare a show, a good show. Shishi said to her father excitedly. In this way we can perform for Papa next month. However, the little girl scratched her head again and said with a little distress, but the teacher said that we have to go through selection. If our show is not good, we can't be selected and can't perform for Papa. Yang Yi smiled and asked, then what kind of show are you going to prepare? Lan Xian giggled and said, Hey Papa Yang, you also know. Yes, the teacher also said that she has to prepare a show because she is a member of the Literature and Arts Committee. I'm not the only one performing. The teacher said that everyone has to participate actively. Xi and Air, you have to participate too. She said quickly. I don't know how to dance. It's too difficult. Lon Xian said noisily. But you are the person in charge, right? Because this is within the scope of the Literature and Arts Committee's responsibility. You have to help the teacher and organize the students to participate in various cultural and entertainment activities. Yang Yi said with a smile. She nodded and said with a pout. But Papa, how do I do this show? It's so difficult. Can you help me think of one? When they encountered difficulties, Shishi's first thought was her father. The little girl knew that her father was almost omnipotent. He would definitely be able to help her and everyone think of a great program. However, Shishi was probably going to be disappointed today. Dad didn't plan to help her, or rather, he didn't plan to help Shishi directly. This was because Yang Yi felt that this was a good opportunity for Shishi to train. Although Yang Yi did have countless novel ideas that could help Shishi directly think of a good program that could pass the selection, if he did that, Shishi would not grow at all. Therefore, Yang Yi pondered for a while. After returning home, he brought Shishi to the side hall. In addition to the piano in the side hall, the small desk that Shishi used to do her homework was still there, and the original large whiteboard was still hanging on the wall. She could write freely. Under her father's arrangement, Shishi sat on her small chair and looked at her father expectantly with her two big eyes. Now, as a member of the Arts and Arts Committee, you have to organize the students in the class to prepare a show for Mom and Dad, right? Yang Yi said with a smile. Dad will teach you how to be a qualified organizer, okay? Shishi looked at her father in a daze. She didn't understand why her father didn't directly talk to her about the program. However, Shishi was still very obedient. She obediently put her hands on the table, sat upright, and listened carefully to her father's words as usual in class. When we think about what kind of program to prepare, we first have to understand what kind of resources we have in our hands. For example, what kind of specialties do the students in the class have? Yang Yi wrote the word specialties on the blackboard and said with a smile, because this is the key factor that determines what kind of program we can perform. Think about it, if the students in the class don't know how to dance and we prepare a dance program, would they be able to participate? Shishi scratched her head in confusion. Her small mouth slightly pouted as she said, but I can dance, and the class monitor can dance too. She's also taking dance classes this semester. Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, Dad was just giving an example. Let's change it. Let's talk about musical instruments. Shishi, you can't play the piano right now, and the other students probably can't either. So, if we prepare a piano program, does that mean we can't perform it? Shishi suddenly understood and said, Oh. The little girl was a little embarrassed. She curved her eyes and pursed her small mouth and smiled gently. You have to understand clearly what kind of programs the students can perform, and then you have to start thinking about what kind of program you want to prepare. Yang Yi smiled as he wrote on the blackboard. When you perform on stage, you can sing. A few people can take turns singing, or everyone can sing together. If everyone can dance, of course, it's not bad to organize a dance program, right? In addition to these, you can also perform plays. Do you still remember when you performed fairy tales with everyone in kindergarten? Shishi's eyes lit up. She giggled and said to her father with a smile, I remember I even performed The Ugly Duckling. Looking at her happy face, it was obvious that those successful performances were indeed very good memories for Shishi. That's right. After you've finished discussing with your classmates, you can discuss with them what you want to perform in this program. Yang Yi smiled and said, For example, if you want to sing, what song should you sing? Choosing the content is also a matter of knowledge. For example, the song Where is Spring is not suitable. Shishi, do you know why? Shishi's interest was completely raised. She tilted her little head and thought very actively. Unfortunately, she still couldn't figure it out. The little girl was a little puzzled and asked, Why? Papa, I really like this song. What season is October? Yang Yi asked with a smile. I know it's autumn. Cece answered loudly at first. Then she came to a sudden realization and giggled, saying, I know it too. It's because you can't sing songs of spring and autumn. That's right. Figure out what song you want to sing. This is the third step. The fourth step is to determine the candidates for the performance, and then start practicing hard. Yang Yi said softly, after hearing what Papa said. Do you understand how to organize this program? Got it. Shishi responded crisply. She stuck out her little chest and raised her head to look at her father in high spirits. She didn't feel depressed because her father didn't directly tell her the answer. On the contrary, after the little girl felt that her thoughts were clear, she was eager to start preparing immediately. Then this program, I'll leave it to you. Go and discuss with your classmates about it. Yang Yi smiled gently and said, if you need anything when you're preparing, you can ask the music teacher or Papa for help. Papa is looking forward to seeing your program on the stage next month. Shishi smiled sweetly at her father. She opened her thin little arms and said expectantly, I must perform a good program for Papa and Mom. Chapter 12:10. The next day, which was also Tuesday morning, Shishi mustered up her courage and ran to the podium. However, when she wanted to imitate the teacher, she was a little lacking in confidence. She called out in a soft and weak voice, everyone, please be quiet for a moment, okay? Obviously, the little girl's voice was a little too soft. When she called out, only the students in the first few rows raised their heads curiously, but the students in the back almost didn't have any reaction. Those who were doing homework did their homework, those who were playing around, and they were still shouting loudly. Seeing this, Shishi was a little anxious and a little helpless as she stood on the podium. Fortunately, at this time the class monitor, Chao Ruolin, stepped forward bravely. Although she was wearing glasses and was as thin as a bean sprout, she stood up and shouted at the top of her voice, Don't talk. Young Shi has something to discuss with you. Chao Ruolin's voice and prestige still had an effect. The classroom of the second grade, Class 3 suddenly quieted down, and everyone looked at the podium in unison. Yes, that's right. Shishi thanked the class monitor gratefully, and quickly talked about the important matter to discuss. That is, don't we have Papa and Mom's opening day next month? Our Papa and Mom will come, and yesterday, the teacher also said that we should strive to perform for our Papa and Mom. Because of nervousness, Shishi's voice was a little weak at first, and the students behind her couldn't hear clearly because they couldn't hear clearly. Chen Yuxuan even ran to the front and sat with his good friends. Looking at Shishi, they laughed softly, poked each other, and pushed each other non-stop. But as she spoke, Shishi got into the mood and began to gain confidence. The students behind her also heard what she said clearly. Right now, I want to discuss with everyone what kind of performance we are going to perform. Shishi was still a little lacking in the organization of words, but fortunately, she had a good memory and immediately corrected herself. I want to see what everyone's specialties are first, and then decide what kind of performance to perform. What's a specialty? Lan Xian's deskmate, Liao Qianqian, asked curiously. Lan Xian immediately used her loud voice to help Shishi answer. That's right, what do you know? For example, my specialty is swimming. Shishi stood on the podium. Although her mouth was no longer nervous, her body was still a little nervous. The little girl's two small hands unconsciously intertwined in front of her body. She even gently pinched the hem of her clothes and played with it. However, her posture was very ladylike. She stood there obediently, giving off a gentle and pitiful aura. However, he was not asking about swimming because there was no swimming pool for swimming. Let's see if everyone knows other things such as dancing, singing, playing the piano, and other special skills. Shishi said softly, reciting what her father had taught her. Lan Xian giggled and said, I know, Shishi, you know all these, but I only know how to sing. Liao Qianqian scratched her head and said embarrassedly, I don't sing well, but I can dance just a little. I don't know how to dance, but I can sing. The crew cut Wang Lele was very active. He raised his hand and said. After a while he added, I forgot to say, I don't know how to play the piano. Perhaps it was because she was usually very popular in the class. Everyone was very active in responding. However, with everyone talking at the same time, everyone had a different situation. All of a sudden, she felt a little dizzy. The little girl stood on the podium in a daze. She looked at this classmate for a while, and then looked at that classmate for a while. Her two beautiful big eyes were very confused. Her father did not tell her how to solve this kind of situation. At this time, the homeroom teacher, Li Ruolin, just happened to stroll over. She wanted to see if these little guys had gone crazy during class break. But what surprised her was that in the corridor outside the classroom, a group of children from other classes were crowded and noisy outside. Only the corridor of the second grade class 3 was empty. Where did everyone go? Li Ruolin curiously walked through the back door and looked into the classroom through the window. Li Ruolin stood outside the classroom with interest. She wanted to see how she organized this small class meeting. When everyone was almost done talking, Chao Ruolin raised her hand and asked, Yangshi, what kind of performance are we performing? If it's dancing, I've also learned a little. If it's singing, then it's fine too. Shishi's delicate eyebrows slightly furrowed. She also said in distress, I don't know either. Everyone is different. In order to show his presence, Chen Yuxuan jumped up from his chair, stretched and said with a smile, What else do you need to think about? Yangshi, you can just perform and tell a story. You're so good at telling stories. It was hard to tell if this sentence was a compliment or a tease, but these naughty boys rarely put down their face to compliment a girl. Therefore, when Shishi heard this, she felt that Chen Yuxuan was talking bad about her. She couldn't help but pout her small mouth in grievance. However, Shishi didn't get angry or sad to the point of crying. She was now full of responsibility and wanted to prepare for this performance. It's not like that. It's everyone's performance. Everyone has to perform together. How can I do it by myself? Shishi held back the grievance in her heart and explained in a low voice, I have to perform for Papa and Mom to see. Everyone's Papa and Mom will come to watch. They will be happy for us. Shishi's words had a bit of an encouraging effect. The students who were originally laughing and joking around calmed down this time. I want to perform because I want my father to praise me. Wang Lele stood up and said, Me too. Chao Ruolin raised her hand high. Lu Xiaoyu, who was behind her, definitely wanted to support Shishi. She also raised her hand excitedly and said, Shishi, I'll perform with you. Everyone chimed in at once. Shishi suddenly felt that she wasn't alone, and her mood suddenly improved. She nodded happily and then asked in a clear voice, But what kind of performance should we perform? Do you have any performances? Asking everyone to give suggestions, the classroom suddenly quieted down. The students looked at each other and looked at each other. After all, they were all at the age where they didn't have their own ideas. Shishi was also thinking anxiously. Suddenly, the little girl's mind flashed. We can sing and dance together. The students who can sing, sing. And then the students who can dance, dance. That's right. Why did it have to be just singing or dancing? In fact, Shishi's thinking was a bit rigid before. Now that a string was connected, the little girl suddenly had an idea. But at this time, there were always a few troublemakers who wanted to cause trouble. Jiang Chen deliberately shouted, But I can't sing or dance. What should I do? Shishi paused for a moment. She didn't think Jiang Chen was deliberately arguing with her. The little girl was also very eager to help Jiang Chen think of a solution. She hoped that everyone could perform so that all the students could happily go on stage, just like in kindergarten. Therefore, Shishi asked softly, Then what are your specialties? Before Jiang Chen spoke, Chen Yuxuan, who didn't get along with Jiang Chen, shouted, Tisk, if he can't sing or dance, then let him tell stories. The two boys were like anxious roosters as they stared at each other with their heads held high. Li Ruolin, who was standing outside the window, felt that something was wrong. She was about to go in and mediate. But unexpectedly, at this moment, Shishi burst with inspiration. She gently clapped her hands together and said cheerfully, Hey, this is pretty good. We can use a story, then everyone can sing, some students can dance, and some students can stand on the side and read a story. That is, in the middle of singing, when you're not singing, you can read a story. There is such a program? The Buddhist girl Lon Xian couldn't help but ask curiously. Yes. Dad, Mom, and I all saw it when we were in the UA. Cece nodded seriously and replied crisply. I think it's called opera or something. Isn't it just opera? Of course, the children definitely couldn't perform such a large-scale program like opera. What kind of tricks could they play? Chapter 12:11. What are you going to perform? Yang Yi thought he misheard Shishi's description and asked in surprise while driving. We're going to perform an opera. That is, Papa, we're going to watch it at Grandpa's house, not at home. We're going to watch it in a big place outside, that opera. Shishi tried to explain to her father. Lon Xian also helped Shishi to explain. She said that we can sing, dance, and then tell stories. Yang Yi understood and smiled. Oh, opera means opera. You want to perform an opera? Who gave you the idea? That's what I thought. No one knows what they're going to perform. Then Papa, let me tell you, everyone's specialties are different. I didn't know what to do at first. Shishi eagerly asked her father for praise. Opera? Lon Xian murmured as she carefully pondered over this name. It's a kind of drama that uses singing and music as the main body to perform. It's a bit like the drama you used to perform in kindergarten, but it's sung. Yang Yi was worried that Lon Xian would misunderstand again, so he explained with a smile, and then said, Shishi, this opera is not easy. How are you going to perform it? Although Yang Yi knew that opera was too profound for Shishi and the others to perform, he did not immediately reject Shishi's decision. Instead, he smiled and asked Shishi about her plan. Sure enough, Shishi still had her own ideas. The little girl said excitedly, That's right, we're going to sing. I've discussed it with the class monitor and the teacher. We're going to sing a very good song, and then some children will play snails and dance. I'm going to tell them a good story, and then they'll read it out. Yang Yi understood the general meaning, and he couldn't help but laugh. It turned out that they just wanted to play an opera, that they understood, although it was a bit naive and sounded a bit too simple. However, a 7-year-old child already had so many ideas of her own. What else did he want her to do? One had to know that Shishi had been raised by Yang Yi as a normal child since she was a child. She had never received any special elite education, nor had she been exposed to many profound movies or books since she was a child. Yang Yi was already very gratified that Cece had shown intelligence and creativity that exceeded her age, even though she hadn't tried to help her grow. Lon Xian's words interrupted Yang Yi's gratification. She shouted, I want to sing, but I haven't learned it yet. And I don't like to act as a snail. It's very hot. Papa, that's right. We want to sing the snail that you taught me. That is, I want to climb up step by step and sing this. Shishi said excitedly to her father. Shishi liked this song very much recently, because Yang Yi hadn't recorded it yet. The little girl often pestered her father to take her to sing this song when she took a walk. Now, it was obvious that the little girl also thought of this song that she was most familiar with recently. Yang Yi said with a smile, Okay, when the time comes, Papa can go and watch you practice. Maybe I can even give you some advice on singing. By the way, Shishi, about that story, do you want to think of a story for everyone to perform? Shishi was in a very good mood at the moment. She was full of energy and replied loudly, Yes, but Papa, can you teach me to tell stories? Papa is the best at telling stories. Yang Yi saw that it was rare that Shishi didn't rely on him to give her ideas. She was very opinionated, and he was very happy in his heart. Wasn't this the growth of Shishi that he wanted to see when he told Shishi how to organize yesterday? Of course, Papa will be your little assistant this time. Yang Yi said with a smile. If you need any support, just let me know. Cece's eyes turned into crescents as she replied with a sweet mmm. Then she giggled happily. Perhaps at this moment, the little girl felt that she had been praised by her father, and she was full of a sense of achievement. In fact, although Yang Yi said that he would let Shishi organize this program, he still couldn't completely let go. Even, Yang Yi's participation was very high. In addition to teaching Shishi to make up stories by herself, Yang Yi also helped Shishi think of another children's song, so that the whole program wouldn't be too monotonous. Obviously, Xixi and her classmates, and even Li Ruolin, didn't know how to combine the two songs seamlessly. This also required the participation of Yang Yi. He helped to mix and rewrite the two songs, and finally made the accompaniment. In addition, Lan's Hao Kai also eagerly joined in. He waved his hand and took all the props in the class. With the support of the two fathers, Xixi's program was perfected day by day in the following month. Moreover, they passed the audition smoothly. They were just waiting for the time to go on stage and perform in front of their parents. Of course, this was a story for another day. With her father's promise, Xixi went to do her homework contentedly. However, today, Mo Fei didn't keep an eye on little Momo. The little guy couldn't sit still in the living room. As if he was playing the game of 1, 2, 3 would figure. His chubby little legs took 3 steps forward. Then he stopped and looked around. Was he checking that his mother wasn't around? He grinned and ran happily to the side hall, where his sister was doing her homework. As Yang Yi didn't let Tong Tong wear diapers anymore, the little boys but didn't look as bulging as before. It seemed to have shrunk quite a bit. However, from behind, when he ran, his shrunken but still looked very cool. Xixi was seriously working on a math problem on a piece of draft paper. At this moment, a shadow approached her from the side. The little girl instinctively glanced over. Tong Tong's sparkling eyes were reflected in her eyes. The little boy just happened to come over. His height was just enough for his eyes to be above his sister's desk, so he struggled to hold on to the edge of the desk with his 2 little hands. Was he discovered by his sister? It's okay. Tong Tong wasn't afraid of his sister. His sister was so gentle and considerate. The little fellow and his sister looked at each other and smiled happily. Don't disturb your sister when she's doing her homework. As expected, Xixi didn't blame Tong Tong. She just rubbed Tong Tong's head as if she was petting a cat. She giggled and said, "Go play by yourself. I'll play with you after I'm done with my homework." Tong Tong didn't seem to hear her. He stood on his tiptoes and looked at the beautiful new pencil case that his father had recently bought for his sister. "What do you want?" Xixi asked curiously. "I want this," Tong Tong said to his sister in a childish voice as he stretched out his hand and pointed at the pen in the pencil case. "Then this is for you. It's the prettiest." Xixi was very generous to her little brother. She specially picked out the prettiest pen and handed it to him. She even made a cartoon pig on the buckle of the pen cap. Tong Tong received his sister's pen and giggled happily at his sister. Then he turned around and ran away. He didn't want to disturb his sister anymore. Xixi continued to do her homework after her little brother returned to the living room. At night, Xixi was thinking about her program. She chatted with her father, and naturally forgot that she had given Tong Tong a pen. Chapter 12:12. In fact, after Tong Tong got the pen from his sister, he played with it for a while before he lost it. He did not even think about it that night. The next day, Yang Yi had to attend a meeting to discuss the cooperation between Sahara and Jiangqing City. He was only there to symbolize his presence, so Murphy stayed at home to take care of her son. In the afternoon, Murphy received a call from her mother. She sat cross-legged on the sofa and chatted happily with her mother on the phone. Women and men were indeed two different creatures. For example, Xixi often called her friends, especially Lu Weisha. Although they rarely met each other, Xixi often talked to Lu Weisha on her father's phone. And Mo Fei was also the same. Although she was more introverted and didn't have many close friends, and she didn't have many friends in the entertainment industry that she often contacted, she still chatted with her family members, such as her mother, Mo Xiaowan, or with her few close friends, such as Sister Luo Xian from Shanghai TV stations, Xixin interview. Tong Tong was also called over by his mother to talk to his grandmother. However, he was a boy. How could they talk so much? He was carried by his mother. He pouted and talked to his grandmother for less than 2 minutes before he felt a little impatient. It was not fun. Moreover, it was so hot to be carried by his mother. Tong Tong struggled to get down and play by himself. Mo Fei had no choice but to put him down with a smile. However, she soon saw little Siamese walking out of the living room with his little chubby legs. She grabbed the microphone and shouted to the little guy, Don't run around and don't ask Steamed Bun to open the door for you. It's dangerous to play outside. Tong Tong giggled and ran away without looking back. When Murphy saw that little Momo just ran to the stairs to play with Steamed Bun, he was relieved. He continued to talk on the phone while paying attention to the little guy's movements. As long as he didn't run upstairs or let Steamed Bun open the door and go outside, Murphy was not very worried that Momo would be in danger. After all, they were at home. Steamed Bun was bored to death. When he saw Tong Tong appear, he happily wagged his tail and scampered over. He lowered his head and squirmed around Tong Tong's feet. He was so excited that he forgot himself. Hee hee hee. Tong Tong smiled in satisfaction when Steamed Bun licked his hand. However, his gaze soon fell on the cushion Steamed Bun was sleeping on. It's here. Sisters. Tong Tong pouted and muttered in his childish voice. He walked closer and looked at the pen on the ground in surprise. Why is elder sister's pen here? Tong Tong had forgotten that he was the one who left the pen there last night. The little guy played with his sister's pen, and then went to show it off to Steamed Bun. However, when he heard that his father was about to eat, he happily put down the pen and ran to the dining room. However, Tong Tong thought that Steamed Bun picked it up and kept it. He patted Steamed Bun's head and said, "Steamed Bun, you're naughty." Steamed Bun responded to his little master's smile with a wide grin. He thought that his little master was praising him, so he excitedly wagged his tail and tried his best to please his little master. Since he found his elder sister's pen, Tong Tong took it and started playing with it. Yesterday, the little guy found the trick to opening the pen. He pulled hard with his two little hands and unscrewed the cap, revealing the short tip of the pen. Steamed Bun stood at the side with his head held high. He breathed out as he looked at the pen. But what was the point of opening the pen cap? Tong Tong tilted his head and thought about it. He remembered that his sister drew for him that day. His eyes lit up and he chuckled. He shouted loudly. Drawl Murphy was on the phone in the living room and didn't pay attention to what Tong Tong was saying. She thought that he was talking to Steamed Bun again, so she only glanced at Tong Tong's side. The wall covered a little, but Murphy could still see the little guy's little butt, so she didn't react. Murphy could see Tong Tong's, but because Tong Tong was imitating his sister. When his sister drew for him, she told him to sit down and not move. The little guy squatted down with his little butt in the air. He held the pen in his right hand and pressed Steamed Bun's back with his left hand. He muttered, "Sit, Steamed Bun, sit." Steamed Bun was very obedient. He had been trained by Yang Yi in the past, so when he heard his little master telling him to sit, he obediently bent his hind legs and sat down with his front legs supporting him. Steamed Bun stuck out his tongue. His dog eyes revealed his usual melancholy, but in reality, it was only his eyes that looked like this. Steamed Bun happily followed his little master's movements and turned his head, thinking that his little master was playing games with him. That's great. If his master didn't play games with him or play with the three big fat cats, Steamed Bun would be bored to death. Tong Tong imitated his sister and nodded his little head at Steamed Bun like a little adult. He muttered, "I'm going to draw." The little guy stood up and walked towards the snow-white wall. Coincidentally, the wall in the stairwell wasn't tiled. How could drawing be as simple as Tong Tong thought? Especially when he drew on the wall with the ballpoint pen. Little Momo realized that the lines he drew were all crooked. The tip of the pen even dug out a little bit of powder from the wall, which floated down along with his handwriting. Eh! The little guy exclaimed in surprise. He turned his head to look at Steamed Bun, as though he was sharing his discovery with him. Steamed Bun's gaze met his little master's for a moment, then he lowered his head. After a while he raised his head again. However, Tong Tong didn't communicate with him anymore. The little guy continued to draw on the wall with interest. The matter of drawing for Steamed Bun was thrown to the back of little Fuching's mind. He felt that he had to do a very powerful investigation. The little guy started from the edge of the wall, grabbed the pen, and started to draw on the wall with force. A long mark appeared on the wall. Xiao Rua was still unsatisfied as it scratched into the wall and reached the top of the bun's nest. Steamed Bun wagged his tail in boredom. His body didn't move, but his head turned half a circle to look at his little master. His eyes were filled with sadness, as though he was used to this kind of life. Xishi's pen was drawn like this, so she probably couldn't write anymore. However, Tong Tong didn't think about this. He still thought that his discovery was very interesting. He was still happily waiting for his sister to come back and tell her. Tong Tong drew a few times and found some white powder on the floor by the wall. When he stepped on it, he even left a few small footprints. This is so fun. Tong Tong's attention was immediately diverted. He forgot to continue drawing, and stepped on the powder excitedly. Murphy was talking to her mother on the phone. She could hear Tong Tong's joyful laughter from the stairwell. She didn't suspect anything and continued to nestle on the sofa. Chapter 12-13. Murphy was almost done chatting with her mother. She leaned forward on the sofa with a smile on her face and shouted, "Hua Hua, Hua Hua, come over here and say goodbye to Grandma." After shouting twice, a small figure ran over from the staircase. Her small steps were very smooth, and there was even a hee-hee sound of laughter mixed in. "He's here." Mo Fei smiled, handed the phone over, and said, "Hua Hua, tell Grandma, bye-bye, see you." But when her gaze shifted from the microphone and fell on little Momo, who looked like a little kitten with gray hair, Mo Fei's voice suddenly stopped, and she was dumbfounded. "Is this gray baby still my precious son? At least his voice is still the same." Tong Tong excitedly pressed his two gray paws on the sofa and shouted into the phone, "Bye-bye, Grandma." Perhaps he heard the English on the other end of the line, so he imitated Huiyao and said, "See you." Murphy snapped out of her daze. She hurriedly said a few words to her mother, and hung up the phone. Then she stared at Tong Tong, who was still hopping on the sofa, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Yang Xiaosu." Murphy was both angry and amused. "What have you done?" Tong Tong was immersed in his own happy little world, and did not notice the change in his mother's mood. He even raised his head and smiled radiantly at his mother. "How did you get yourself into this state? Where were you playing just now?" Murphy helplessly asked as she held up the little fella's dirty paws. Just Hua Hua, I was playing with steamed bun." Tong Tong blinked his big innocent eyes and explained, I was painting. "Steamed bun brought you to be mischievous?" Murphy looked at Tong Tong suspiciously. Tong Tong was not deliberately making things difficult for his teammates. He simply thought that steamed bun was wallowing in the mire with him. Therefore, after listening to the first half of her mother's words, she automatically ignored the little puppy in the second half, and happily nodded her little head. Fortunately, Murphy was still skeptical and did not believe Tong Tong's words. She carried the little fella, and went to the staircase to check. After turning the corner, Murphy saw the mess on the walls and floor. Her face instantly darkened. "Oh my God! Yang Xiaosu, look at what you've done." Murphy was both angry and amused as she put the little fella down. Then, she put her hands on her hips and stared at the innocent little fella. She said in a slightly reproachful tone, "You even threw the responsibility to steamed bun. Does steamed bun have the guts to mess up the house like this?" Murphy clearly forgot that steamed bun once had a glorious record of tearing paper towels all over the floor. Last year, Yang Yi used paper towels to set up a formation in the staircase for Xixi and Tong Tong to play a game. Although it was not entirely steamed bun's fault that time, the other three big fat cats who attacked first ran away, and left steamed bun to be scolded. Steamed bun was still involved. Murphy may have forgotten about this incident, but steamed bun still remembered it. When his masters were angry, they were very scary. He had been scolded many times and was even locked up in a small dark room a few times. Therefore, seeing that little Sasaku was pitifully scolded, steamed bun mustered up his courage, ran over from the side, and stood between the big master and the little master. He even raised two forelimbs and put them on Murphy's thighs enthusiastically. Wahua! Steamed bun could not stand properly. He fell down and spun around twice before he exhaled and stood up. It was as if he was helping to stop the fight so that Murphy would not blame Tong Tong. Little Momo seemed to have sensed his mother's anger this time. He reached out and scratched his face, leaving behind two gray streaks. His eyes, however, were darting around as he secretly glanced at his mother, who was helplessly standing with her hands on her hips and looking at his battle records. His mother's expression clearly said, "You're in trouble. What should I do?" Tong Tong did not know either. He could only stand there helplessly, not daring to move. He even tried his best to blink his innocent and cute big eyes and pretend to be pitiful. Luckily, Steamed Bun's sister helped to stop her. Otherwise, his mother would have held his little butt down and given him a good spanking. Murphy was actually trying to think of a solution, but after looking around, she finally sighed helplessly. She imitated the accent she saw on TV and said, "It's over, Yang Xiaosu. Mom is telling you, you're in big trouble. Even Mom can't help you make up for it." What was there to make up for? Other than a few black handwriting on the wall, there were only messy marks made by Tong Tong with the tip of his pen. Thus, the bottom of the wall looked like a field that had been plowed. It was full of potholes and was a terrible sight to behold. When Murphy thought of Yang Yi, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up slightly. She said to the little boy in a bad mood, "When your papa comes back, he has OCD. He'll definitely go crazy when he sees the mess you made on the wall." Little Mommy knew that he had really gotten into trouble, and was even scolded by his mother. His initial excitement had long disappeared without a trace. Gradually, his panic and helplessness took over. One could see that the rims of his eyes had turned red and his little mouth had pursed. He did not cry. This was just a sign that he was afraid of being scolded. She watched as the little boy aggrievedly moved closer to his mother, and then carefully grabbed her hand. Although he did not make a sound, his pitiful appearance still softened Murphy's heart. "Okay, Mom will give you a bath first and then mop the floor. Look at you, your head is covered in dust." Murphy hugged Tong Tong lovingly and said softly, "Don't be naughty next time." In his mother's arms, little Wanchen felt a little more at ease. At this moment, the tears that were welling up in his eyes slid down his little face. He sadly buried his little head in his mother's arms, not wanting to be scolded anymore. In the evening, Yang Yi, who was not the main character, found an excuse to sneak away. He did not attend the dinner party. Instead, he went to pick up Shishi and Lan Xian to go home. When he arrived home, Yang Yi did not put down his car keys and Shishi's school bag. Murphy walked over to him and held his hand while trying to hold back her laughter. She said, "Come here. Let me show you what your precious son did this afternoon." Tong Tong was happy to see his sister, but when he heard his mother's words, he panicked. "Didn't Mama help me clean the floor? Why did she betray him again?" No. The little guy cried out anxiously, but when he thought about how he was unable to stop such a big daddy with his small stature, his expression turned into one of fear. He whimpered a few times, grabbed his sister's school uniform skirt, and hid behind his sister's little butt. Shishi looked at her parents in confusion. Then she grabbed Tong Tong's hand, which was tightly grabbing her skirt, and asked curiously, "Little brother, what did you do?" The floor had been cleaned by Murphy, and Tong Tong was not as dirty as he was at the beginning. However, when Yang Yi saw the pockmarked wall, his reaction was exactly as Murphy had predicted. He was conflicted. He looked conflicted. After listening to Murphy's explanation, Yang Yi did not know whether to laugh or cry at the mischievous Tong Tong. However, he still looked at the messy wall with a conflicted expression. "This is not easy." Yang Yi looked at it for a while, then said to Murphy with a bitter smile, "His scratches are destructive. I want to add some drawings to cover it up, but I can't change it." The method Yang Yi was referring to was similar to when she was not very good at drawing. In order to make her happy, he would deliberately make her scribbled drawings into a complicated rework and turn them into a magnificent painting. However, Tong Tong's drawing was not good. It was messy, full of crooked carvings, and most importantly, it was not symmetrical. "Then we can only get someone to repaint the wall, or put up some tiles. This way, Tong Tong will not damage the wall," Mo Fei asked with a smile. "Fortunately, he is not tall. It's just the lower part of his body that is suffering. We just need to stick the tiles below it." "This is not a solution." Yang Yi pondered. He reached out to touch the wall and said, "Oh yeah, what did he use to scratch? Why is the wall in such a mess?" Chapter 12-14. When Yang Yi touched the wall, Shishi and Tong Tong were standing behind him. Tong Tong knew that he was in big trouble. He was afraid that his father would blame him, so he hugged his sister's waist tightly and hid behind her. Shishi looked at the wall in surprise. She did not expect Tong Tong to be so destructive, so she could not believe it. She turned her head and whispered to Tong Tong, "Little brother, did you do this?" Tong Tong looked at his sister pitifully and was too embarrassed to answer. Of course, his frightened eyes had already told his sister the answer. In fact, Shishi was at her age, so it was normal for her to scribble on the wall. However, Shishi was different. She loved to be clean. Looking at the wall that was full of holes because of her brother's scribbles, Shishi felt a little awkward. Therefore, Sisi also frowned slightly and muttered hesitantly, "This isn't right." However, at this time Murphy picked up Tong Tong's crime tool. The ballpoint pen that Murphy picked up when she was cleaning the floor. It was so damaged that it could not write anymore. Shishi was at a loss when she saw her mother's pen appear in her mother's hand. Then her father picked it up and looked at it carefully. A light flashed through the girl's eyes. She remembered. Shishi remembered what happened yesterday. What should she do? Shishi hesitated for a while and whispered to her father, Papa, this is my pen." Yang looked at Shishi in surprise. Of course, he recognized that it was Shishi's pen. However, he didn't think about pursuing this matter. After all, little Momo had taken the pen from her sister herself. Yang didn't really care about it, even if she had picked up the pen that her sister had left behind on the ground. However, Sisi still plucked up her courage and said weakly, "Papa, let me tell you. Yesterday, when I was doing my homework, my younger brother came to play with me. Then I gave my pen to him to play with, and he scratched the wall. Papa, don't be angry with your younger brother, okay?" It turned out that his sister was pleading for his little brother. Little Momo hugged her elder sister's waist and hid behind her. Although her elder sister had said a lot, little Momo still understood the last sentence. Her heart immediately felt supported and filled with happiness. He secretly poked his little head out and looked at his father. He wanted to see if his father would forgive him if his sister begged for mercy. Therefore, Tong Tong was surprised to see his father's face suddenly enlarged. Fortunately, there was a gentle smile on his father's face that made him feel at ease. Of course, Yang smiled at Shishi. He bent down and gently stroked Shishi's soft hair and said with a smile, "Papa did not say that he would be angry. Moreover, he did not intend to pursue the matter because of this pen. Since it has already happened, let's not hold on to too much negative energy. First of all, we have to think of a way to solve this problem, and how we can prevent this kind of bad things from happening again in the future." Shishi's anxious little heart calmed down. She nodded obediently at her father and smiled happily. Okay. Yang felt that the atmosphere was a little depressing. He stood up, clapped his hands, and said loudly, "Now Shishi, go and do your homework. Don't delay it. Mommy, you go and play too. Papa will think of a solution. We'll talk about it during dinner." After Yang finished speaking, he could not help but reach out and stroke Tong Tong's head. He shook his head and said with a smile, "You little troublemaker. Papa is not home and you're already being naughty. Don't do it again." Although his father didn't seem to be angry, little Fuqing had already heaved a sigh of relief. But at this moment he still didn't dare to look his father in the eye. After his father rubbed his head, he hurriedly hid behind his sister to avoid the wind and rain. Of course, Yang would not let Tong Tong off so easily. It was normal for children to be naughty when they were young. Naughty children had high IQ, but they needed proper guidance from their parents. If their parents did not teach them and only spoiled them, they would easily grow into naughty children in the future. However, his way of teaching was a little special. During dinner, Yang put food in Shishi and Tong Tong's bowl, and said with a smile, "Just now I asked Xionaire's father. There are too many people in his company who know about these things, so I got a very good suggestion from them." Shishi held her chopsticks and looked at her father attentively. Her big eyes were filled with curiosity. Tong Tong, on the other hand, was obsessed with the bright red boiled prawns on the table. His eyes were fixed on his mother, because she was helping him to peel the prawns. After peeling the prawns, she dipped the prawns in soy sauce and stuffed them into his mouth. With just a gentle bite, the tender prawns were chewed open. An indescribable freshness bloomed in his mouth. Delicious. Tong Tong was so excited that he shook his little hands. He did not pay attention to his father's words at all. Peel the prawns later. Let's talk about something first, Yang Yi said to Murphy. Tong Tong looked at his mother's hand reluctantly. Then he looked at the fresh prawns on the plate. Finally, he licked his lips and looked at his father. Yang Yi smiled and said, "On Saturday, I will use a very magical blackboard paint to repaint the wall that Momo destroyed. Not only will I repaint this wall, but I will also repaint the staircase and the walls facing the staircase." Pay attention. Why did I choose blackboard paint? Yang Yi deliberately kept them in suspense. Because. She wanted to answer, but she did not understand what her father meant by blackboard paint. Because after the blackboard paint, the walls will be like a blackboard. You can use it to write and draw. However, you must use the dust-free chalk that I will buy for you. Yang Yi smiled and said, "Don't worry. Just like Shishi's crayons, the chalk comes in many colors. When the time comes, both Shishi and Momo will be able to draw on our walls." That's right. Blackboard paint did have such benefits. Moreover, the chalk could be wiped off with a cloth. After wiping it clean, the chalk could be restored to its original clean and tidy color. Yes, the color of blackboard paint did not have to be black. It could be different colors such as the more common gray, sky blue, less saturated orange, or eye-friendly green wall paint. After listening to her father's vivid description, a pleasantly surprised expression appeared on Cece's little face. She still couldn't believe it and asked, "Really? Papa, can we draw on the walls in the future?" Although they could draw on paper, Shishi, who had done blackboard bulletins before, still felt that it would be more interesting to draw on a bigger wall. "Wow! Papa, you are so awesome!" The little girl was overjoyed. She cheered, then turned her head and shouted to Tong Tong, who was still in a confused state. "Little brother, let me tell you, Papa said that we can draw on the walls in the future." Shishi felt that Tong Tong would be very happy to hear the news if he liked to draw on the walls. Little Tao Chun was shaken by his sister, and only then did he shake the delicious prawn out of his head. He looked at his sister in confusion, but perhaps he was infected by his sister's emotions. The little fellow also giggled. "Don't be happy too early," Yang Yi said with a smile. "Shishi, your little brother might not understand, but you can only draw on the new walls. You can't destroy the original walls like you did this afternoon. In the future, you have to bring your little brother to draw with you more often, and help him correct his incorrect ways." Shishi was still immersed in the happiness of having a bigger space to create. She did not find it troublesome at all, and nodded happily to her father. The little girl said in a clear voice, Yes, Papa, I will draw with my little brother." "Huachi, because you did something wrong this afternoon, of course Papa will not blame you. However, because you did something wrong, you brought trouble to Papa and Papa. Huachi, you have to do something for Papa and Papa to make up for it." Yang Yi looked at Tong Tong and said gently. Tong Tong opened his little mouth slightly, and looked at his father in confusion. Chapter 12:15. It was Saturday. Perhaps it was because of the autumn rain yesterday, but the weather in Jiangqing was very good. The blue sky was clear and bright, as if it had just been washed. Without the heavy clouds blocking the way, the early morning sun shone brightly as it shone diagonally on the lawn in the front yard, dyeing the lush green leaves with a glittering golden edge. Of course, Yang Yi's villa was very lively today. "Tong Tong, come here. Carry Bao Zi's kennel and put it on this small cart." Yang Yi pushed the borrowed wheelbarrow directly to the stairwell. Then he leaned against the staircase and pointed at Bao Bao's kennel with a smile on his face. He snapped his fingers and said, "Little mommy, look at this." Since they needed to paint a few walls, Yang Yi planned to bring Murphy, the children, and the family's cats and dogs to Lans Hao Kai's villa for a few days. Although the blackboard paint recommended by Lans Hao Kai was environmentally friendly, it was still paint. Yang Yi felt that for the children's health, they should vacate the house and air it out for a few days before moving in. As for why Tong Tong wanted to help his father move, it was because he had gotten into big trouble before, so he needed to do some simple work to make up for his mistakes. Of course, Yang Yi was not too strict. He only asked Tong Tong to do some things within his ability, such as moving Baozi's kennel onto the small cart. Baozi's kennel was like a soft cushion, so it was not heavy at all. It was just right for Tong Tong to carry. Tong Tong did not mind because everyone was busy working. Even she was carrying her school bag and running around. The little girl felt that there were a lot of things to carry, so she was dazzled by the selection. In such a lively atmosphere, Tong Tong did not want to be left out. He had been giggling and running around behind his sister. Now that he could participate in this, he was naturally happy to do so. Yeah. The little guy barked loudly. Then, like a little train, he ran past his father with a snort of laughter. Tong Tong stuck out her little butt and grabbed the edge of the kennel with her two little hands. She struggled to drag the kennel. The weight was not a big problem, but the kennel was a little too big. Tong Tong lifted the kennel up to her head with her two little hands, and part of the kennel was still dragging on the ground. It's a little difficult. You have to take it slow, don't fall. Yang Yi looked at Tong Tong with concern. He was careful to prevent Tong Tong from falling, and was ready to grab him at any time. However, he had no intention of helping. He even smiled and said sarcastically, "Hey, do you see that? You've messed up the walls and caused so much trouble for everyone. Even Steamed Bun has to move for you." Tong Tong was still trying her best to drag the kennel towards the trolley. Her father was so mean he didn't even push the trolley to her. However, the little guy showed the Yang family's fine tradition. She had the tenacity to not give up easily. Even though it was a little troublesome, Tong Tong still persisted. Her little body was bursting with amazing energy. Coincidentally, Steamed Bun, who had gone out for a walk in the morning, came back. When he saw this scene, he wagged his tail and ran over briskly. Steamed Bun didn't mind at all that his kennel had been touched by his little master. After all, he was often arranged to stay at Lan Xin's house when his big master and little master went out for concerts or tours. Hence, Steamed Bun, who was already used to it, even went up to him enthusiastically and bit the lower part of his kennel, trying his best to help little Tao Wu pull. "Here, put it here," Yang Yi instructed. Steamed Bun bit the kennel with his mouth and pulled it towards the trolley. He even put his two front paws on it and helped Tong Tong put the kennel in place before letting go. He Steamed Bun. After Tong Tong finished her task, she opened her two little fingers. One of her hands subconsciously wiped her body, while the other patted Steamed Bun's head. She was in a good mood and laughed with Steamed Bun. At this time, she came down the stairs. Along with the thumping sound of the stairs, the little girl shouted before she came down. "Papa, I want to bring my stuffed toys. But there are so many of them. How can I bring them?" Yang Yi looked up and saw Shi, who was sticking her head out of the stairs. From this angle, the little girl was also very cute. Her soft black hair fell down, and the delicate features on her small face were faintly discernible. Of course, her big bright eyes could not be hidden no matter what. Shi's bright eyes were full of joy and anxiety, which were intertwined into a kind of sadness that made people want to dote on her. They were all vividly expressed in her eyes. "You don't have to bring them. We're just going to stay at Xian Air's house for a few days." Yang Yi explained with a smile. "It's not like we can't come back. You just need to bring a few textbooks. If you need anything during these few days, Papa will come back and get it for you." Shi understood. She waved away her sadness and replaced it with joy. She smiled brightly with her clean teeth and big watery eyes. She turned around and ran back. Okay. Tong Tong's work was not finished yet. Yang Yi took the little boy and continued to spread the newspaper on the tiles at the top of the stairs. He first demonstrated. "Look, let's spread this newspaper, starting from this edge and corner. When Papa paints the walls in the afternoon, it won't dirty the floor." Tong Tong stood beside his father and looked at him curiously. He seemed to be very interested in this kind of manual work. After Papa finished spreading the newspaper, he stepped on it with interest. "Come, help Papa spread the newspaper too." Yang Yi smiled and handed over a stack of newspapers. "Help Papa with the work, and you have to remember the consequences of this mess. Don't mess around in the future. If you want to paint on the walls, you have to get Papa and Mama's permission." He didn't know if the little guy was listening to his father's nagging. In any case, he spread out the newspaper. This task was already quite a challenge for the little guy with small arms and short legs. He tried his best to learn from his father, and spread his 2 small arms wide open. After many attempts and a lot of effort, Tong Tong finally spread out a newspaper. He was overjoyed. He put the spread newspaper on the floor, then turned around and ran to his father. He held his father's shoulder and said with a sense of accomplishment, "Papa, Papa, it's done." Yang Yi and Tong Tong spread the newspaper. Because he deliberately left a lot of space for Tong Tong to do, Murphy and Shishi had already packed their luggage, but Tong Tong still had some unfinished work. "Papa, let me help little brother." Shishi put her small school bag at the door and ran over enthusiastically. "No, this time little brother has to finish it himself." Yang Yi leaned against the stairs and smiled. "There are only 2 newspapers left. I'm almost done." However, when Tong Tong heard his sister's words, his enthusiasm suddenly disappeared. He even automatically ignored his father's attempts to stop him. The little boy raised his small head and looked at his sister with a big smile. He even grabbed a newspaper and stretched it towards his sister. He said with a strong sense of dependence, "Sister." Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and was about to say something. However, at this time, Lan Xian's voice came from outside. The door of the courtyard was open, so she walked in directly. However, from afar, Lan Xian couldn't wait to shout, "Papa Yang, Shishi, are you done yet? You want to come to our house for lunch?" Lan Xian had asked, and said that the rice was ready. They were just waiting for Papa Yang to cook. Chapter 12-16. Shishi, I realized that you haven't lived in my house before. I used to live in your house. At noon after lunch, Lan Xian took Shishi upstairs to her bedroom to play and rest. On the stairs, the chubby little girl couldn't help but chatter excitedly. Shishi hugged her white bear cub and followed behind Lan Xian with a joyful smile on her face. Her laughter and voice also reverberated throughout the spiral staircase. "That's because I think my home is more fun. Then you like to come to my house to play." "Who said that? My house is also fun. My father bought me a lot of toys." Lan Xian shouted, unconvinced. "But I also come to your house often. You don't have a lot of toys." Shishi giggled, indicating that she didn't believe her. "Then I'll find them all for you. Shishi, let me tell you, I really have a lot of toys." Lan Xian trotted 2 steps. She didn't care that she was a little tired from running too fast. She gasped and shouted, "Come up quickly." The 2 girls weren't quarreling. Lan Xian wanted Shishi and her family to come to her house often to play. She wanted to try her best to promote how fun her house was. As for Shishi, she wasn't arguing with Lan Xian. The little girl was just stating a fact. She didn't usually see how many toys Lan Xian had. 5 minutes later, Shishi's exclamation sounded one after another in Lan Xian's bedroom. "Wow. Xian, it's true. Why do you have so many toys?" Lan Xian saw that the pink bed in Lan Xian's bedroom was already covered with a pile of toys. Lan Xian was still trying hard to take out boxes of unopened toys from the cabinet next to her, and continued to pile them on the bed. After hearing Shishi's exclamation, Lan Xian stopped to take a breath. The chubby little girl gasped and put her hands on her waist. She said proudly, "Yes. I told you I have a lot of toys. My father bought them for me." In fact, Lan Kai had never been stingy with buying toys for Lanxin. Whenever there were any interesting toys in the market, he would always buy them for Lanxin from the bootlickers in the company. Moreover, he would buy a whole bunch of them, so Lanxin couldn't play with all of them. Hence, she didn't open the packaging of many of the toys and ended up getting the nanny, Grandma Wu, to help keep them in the cupboard. Of course, it wasn't that Lan Xian didn't want to share with Shishi. It was just that her and Shishi's interests and hobbies were a bit different. When Lan Xian went to Shishi's house, Shishi liked to show her new toys and dolls to Lan Xian. When Shishi went to Lan Xian's house to play, Lan Xian didn't think about toys at all. Instead, she eagerly took out the imported snacks that Wu Jingjing bought when she traveled abroad and shared them with Shishi. The things that they took out to share with their best friends were their most precious things. Of course, Shishi and Lan Xian didn't think so much. The two of them even quickly forgot the topic of the argument on the stairs. They sat on the bed excitedly and started to play with the toys on the bed. Air, what's this? She found a book that looked like a magazine, but she didn't open the plastic packaging. I don't know. Take a look. Lon Xian supported herself on the bed with both hands and moved her little, but to Shi's side. She also looked at it curiously. Cici swiftly tore open the plastic packaging and took out the booklet inside. When she opened it, she found that there were loose pages inside. Apart from a few white paper cards, there were only colorful pages. Moreover, there was a certain luster that was reflected in them. There are no words. She felt that it was very magical. She opened her mouth slightly and muttered to herself. This isn't a book, right? Lon Xian pointed at the back of the cover. There seemed to be some instructions. She said to Shishi, Shishi, look at what's written on the back. Shishi looked at it carefully and read a few words in a low voice. Then she understood. She grinned happily and said, Xian, I know. This is a sticker. Then it says that we can use it to make beautiful pictures. Look, here's an example. It's a flower pot. Oh. Lon Xian suddenly understood. Lon Xian wasn't very interested, but Shishi found it very interesting. She held the different colored stickers in her two little hands and suggested happily, Xian, do you have scissors? We can play with them. Although Lon Xian wasn't very interested, she didn't have her own opinions. When she saw that Shishi wanted to play, she jumped off the bed and ran to find scissors for Shishi. Shishi took the scissors that Lon Xian found in the cupboard, tilted her head, and thought about it. What should we stick? Just stick a flower pot. There are examples here. Lon Xian blinked and pointed at the flower pot. No, that won't be fun. We have to stick something interesting ourselves. Shishi said with great interest. Xian, how about we stick a cat? Cats are super cute. The image of the 3 fat cats that Cici had just brought over flashed across Lon Xian's mind. She hurriedly shook her head and grumbled. No, cats don't look good. Your cats are all black, they don't look good. Shishi giggled and explained. Oh no, Xiao Guai and the other cats aren't black, they're blue. Then the cats we stick on can't be like them. We can stick a super cute one because cats are easy to draw. There are 3 whiskers on both sides. Oh, Xian, we can stick the whiskers of the cats in different colors. They'll definitely look good. Under Shishi's description, Lon Xian finally became a little interested. She nodded and then cut and stuck the stickers together with Shishi. They played in full swing. After an unknown amount of time, on the white card, a rather abstract cat's head, made of stickers, leaped out. It had a green outline, blue ears, purple cat eyes, a black cat nose, and a red little mouth. Of course, all the eyes, nose, and mouth were angular. Even if they used scissors to cut the stickers, the 2 girls couldn't cut them into a round shape. But that didn't matter. What was left was the cat whiskers that Shishi couldn't forget. Xian, let's stick on one side each, okay? Then the 3 whiskers have to be different colors. The little girl suggested excitedly. Sure. Lon Xian was also engrossed in playing with Shishi, and she was all smiles as she replied. But at this time, Lon Xian's door opened. Yang Yi, who was worried, came up to see if Shishi was used to sleeping. As soon as he opened the door, he saw the 2 girls playing on the bed. Why haven't you taken a nap yet? Yang Yi asked in surprise. Shishi was making stickers with Lon Xian. When she heard the sound, she looked at her father in a daze. Papa? Ah, Papa is here. Go to sleep. Shishi was like a little girl who had been caught doing something bad, and she shouted in panic. Yang Yi's gaze fell on Lon Xian's messy bed. He raised his eyebrows and asked, What are you doing? How can you sleep with so many things on the bed? Wasn't that right? Shishi and Lon Xian wanted to lift the quilt and hide in it in a panic, but they found that the quilt was pressed down. 2 little cunning girls. Yang Yi smiled and rubbed their heads. He said in a bad mood, Come down and clean up the bed with me. Then you can take a nap. Shishi smiled embarrassedly and shyly came down. The little girl was actually worried that her father would blame her. In order to change the topic, She rolled her eyes and called softly, "Papa! Look at the cat whiskers that Xian and I put on. They are super cute. Do you have any?" Chapter 12:17. When they returned to school on Monday, during the morning break, the girls got together to play again. They kicked the shuttlecock while chatting. When Shishi said that she lived in Lan Xian's house and had all kinds of fun toys, Lu Xiaoyu, Yang Luoqi, and the others all exclaimed in envy. "Shishi, why are you living in Xian's house?" Chen Shiyan asked in confusion. "Because we can't live in our house yet." Shishi ran to pick up the shuttlecock and said with great interest, "So Papa took us to live in Xian's house for 2 days. Why can't we live in your house?" Chen Shiyan was persistent in getting to the bottom of it. Only then did Shishi understand Chen Shiyan's question. She exclaimed and said with a smile, "It's like this. My brother was painting and he damaged the wall in our house." I know. Shishi, you told me last week," Lu Xiaoyu said excitedly. "Yes, then Papa said that he wanted to paint the blackboard at home. Oh, I don't know what it is. Anyway, it can turn the wall into a blackboard and it's not black. There are several colors and it's super beautiful." Shishi had already seen the effect of the blackboard paint. She used both her hands and feet to describe it to her friends. "When it's ready, you can use chalk to draw on it. It's super interesting." The painted walls of the house were not fierce tigers or beasts. Yang Yi was just worried that the environmentally friendly paint would still have a smell, so he wanted to air it for a few days. But in fact, the next day after the paint was painted, Yang Yi took the detector to check, and there was no excessive harmful substances. Therefore, Shishi wanted to follow her father to see the new wall, and Yang Yi also took her back to take a look. "That's amazing." After listening to Shishi's description, Lu Xiaoyu spared no effort to support her. She praised with envy, and even her eyes were sparkling, as if there were little stars jumping out. "Shishi, can we go to your house to paint?" Yang Luoqi asked enviously. I want to go too." Chen Shiyan raised her hand and said, unwilling to be left out. Hey, you're not as fast as me," Lan Xian said proudly. "I've asked. In 2 days, we can go to Xi's house to play. I'm going to paint with Xi first, and then when you come, we'll be painting for the second time." However, Lan Xian felt that it was a pity, and she muttered, "Oh, but I still like Shishi to live in our house because I like to play with Shishi, and then Papa Yang can cook delicious food for me." Shishi didn't quite understand what Lan Xian was muttering, but she enthusiastically explained to her other friends, "It doesn't matter, you can still paint when you come. Because my papa said that it's like a blackboard, you can paint again after wiping it clean. It's very interesting. You can come to my house to play. Do you have time this weekend? You can come and play," Shishi suggested, jumping on the ground happily after kicking the shuttlecock. "I have to ask my father," Yang Luoqi whispered. "I'm sure I can. Shishi, let me tell you, if I go to your house to play, my father and mother will definitely agree." Chen Shiyan shouted proudly. "I want to go too, but Shishi, can I bring noodles over?" Yu Xiaowei asked expectantly and nervously. "Because I don't want it to be alone at home on weekends. It's so lonely, so pitiful." Noodles was Yu Xiaowei's little poodle, and it should be more than a year old now. Of course, Shishi often heard interesting stories about her puppy from Yu Xiaowei, so she naturally knew what Noodles was. "Of course. Sister Xiaowei, of course you can bring Noodles over to play. I haven't played with Noodles yet. Also, it can play with our families Bao Bao and Xian's Bye Bye." Shishi nodded naturally and laughed with Sister Xiaowei. Yu Xiaowei's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled happily. She couldn't help but jump slightly. The girl, who was already in 4th grade, couldn't help but blush. She didn't know if it was because she was excited or because she felt a little embarrassed. Shishi's little friends decided to come to Shishi's house to play this Saturday. However, the week had just begun, and there was still a long way to go before the weekend, so the little guys had to wait patiently. As for Shishi, she could move back home on Wednesday. Although she couldn't participate in the process of moving, Shishi was looking forward to it, and finally, school ended in the evening. The little girl couldn't wait to get into her father's car, and asked nervously, "Papa, Are we going home now? Back to our home, not Xionaire's home. After getting an affirmative answer from her father, the little girl was relieved and looked out of the window happily, looking forward to going home soon. The little girl, who was homesick, was so anxious that she didn't even have the mood to tell her father what had happened at school today. Lan Xian, on the other hand, asked Yang Yi eagerly, Papa Yang, have you moved back home? So soon? Have you moved everything back? What about Bao Bao and the others? But where are you going to cook tonight? You can eat at home? After confirming that Papa Yang was no longer living in her house, Lan Xian regretfully said, Oh, and then the little girl looked out of the window with melancholy and quieted down with Shishi. However, after returning home, Shishi was in high spirits again. She unfastened her seatbelt and said excitedly to Lan Xian, Xionaire, do you want to come to my house to have a look? There are new walls, and we can draw together. Lan Xian was eagerly waiting for Shishi's invitation. Hearing this, she hurriedly nodded her head overjoyed and said, Okay. How could Yang Yi not see through Lan Xian's thoughts? He laughed and deliberately teased her, asking, Xionaire, don't you want to go home and do your homework? I'll do my homework with Shishi. I can do my homework at your house, Lan Xian replied wittily. But don't you want to draw with Shishi? If you draw and do your homework, how can you make it home in time for dinner? Yang Yi held back his laughter and continued to ask. Shishi giggled. Before getting out of the car, she suggested for her little friend, Xionaire can eat at our house. Yes, I'll call Mom and tell her. Lan Xian looked at Papa Yang nervously as she spoke carefully. Her heart was in a mess, and she was afraid that Papa Yang would disagree. What about tonight? Tonight, Shishi is going to learn to play the piano. She hasn't learned for a long time. Xionaire, do you want to come and learn with us? Yang Yi was actually very willing to invite Lan Xian to his house for a meal, but he was deliberately teasing, making things difficult, the little foodie. The expression on Lan Xian's little face was wonderful. She was unwilling, tangled, and distressed. Finally, she pouted her little mouth and said unhappily, Then okay? Not bad, not bad. Yang Yi rubbed Lan Xian's little head and said proudly, You love to study so much. Your mom will definitely agree to let you stay here and play with Shishi. Go and play. Have fun. How could Lan Xian be happy? However, after she got out of the car, she felt relieved. No matter what happened tonight, she would go and play and eat happily with Shishi. So the little fat girl ran again and shouted loudly, Shishi, wait for me. Chapter 12:18. The children counted the days with their fingers. After enduring for a few days, it was finally the weekend that they had been looking forward to. Today was the day that they had agreed to come to Shishi's house to play. Early in the morning, Shishi told Tong Tong, Many of my classmates are coming over to play today. There's Sister Xiaowei, Sister Qiqi, Sister Fishy, and Sister Shiyin. Oh, and also Brother Nan Zhaoyu. Tong Tong still remembered those sisters, especially the foreign lady who looked different from the rest. Tong Tong became excited. After he finished his breakfast, he ran in and out of the door. He even curiously ran to the gate of the yard and grabbed the fence to look outside. After looking for a while, he pouted in confusion and ran back. He stammered, Sister, then she's still. The little guy's vocabulary was too limited. Fortunately, Shishi could understand Tong Tong's meaning. She smiled and explained, Oh, they're not that fast. They'll be here in a while. Tong Tong opened his mouth and looked at his sister for a while. After a while, he stuck out his tongue and mimicked his sister. Stay, come. Fortunately, the other children were also eager to come to Shishi's house. Thus, when it was just past 9 o'clock, they all arrived one after another at Shishi's house. Lu Xiaoyu and Yang Luoqi were the first to arrive. Then Chen Shiyin and Nan Zhaoyu came together because they lived close to each other. When Lan Xian heard the news, she also came to gather with everyone. Yu Xiaowei was the last to arrive. She usually came early, but today was different. She had brought noodles with her, so it was troublesome for her to leave the house. After a while, she became the slowest to arrive. Wow. Sister Xiaowei, your puppy is so small. Noodles appeared in front of everyone for the first time. The cute little toy poodle with red curly hair suddenly became the center of attention. Sister Xiaowei, can I touch it? Shishi, Lan Xian, and the others surrounded it excitedly, chirping. Even Shishi, who likes small animals, squatted down and looked at it carefully. Sure. Yu Xiaowei was holding the dog leash. When she saw that her friends liked Noodles so much, she was also very happy. When she heard Shishi say that she wanted to touch it, Yu Xiaowei quickly responded. She even squatted down and gently touched Shishi's head to comfort the little guy, who was a little nervous after coming to a new environment and seeing so many strangers. She said to Shishi, Shishi, Noodles will be very obedient if you touch it like this. Shishi was actually still a little scared, so she touched it tentatively. Noodles stuck out its little tongue and raised its head. It used its little black nose to nudge Shishi's hand. This scared Shishi so much that she quickly retracted her hand. However, when she saw the innocent light in Noodles' eyes, which were like two inlaid black gems, she was relieved. Hee hee. Sister Xiaowei, it's really small. When steamed bun was little, it was already this big. Shishi said to Yu Xiaowei. Yes. Yu Xiaowei quickly explained to Shishi. I heard from others that Noodles is this big because it's a very small dog, and it's also more than a year old. After Shishi touched it, the other girls also reached out their hands and touched the little toy poodle with curiosity and love. Nan Jiaoyu didn't dare to touch it because he saw the white, sharp teeth of the Noodles when it opened its mouth. He was a little scared, but he still looked at it from the side with fear and love. Moreover, he still excitedly shared his discovery with his friends. Look, the Noodle's hair is curly. Oh right. I forgot about it. Cici exclaimed in surprise. Curly hair looks good. Our Bai Bai and Shishi's steamed bun have straight hair. Lan Xian also commented. But I think Bai Bai's hair looks better. Indeed, how many dogs have better hair than the Samoyed? Chen Shiyan shouted. Xian, or why didn't you bring your families Bai Bai over to play? It's so fun to play with 3 dogs. Okay then. I'll bring Bai Bai here now. Lan Xian stood up. Nan Jiaoyu wanted to work hard to increase his presence, so he couldn't help but interrupt. That Sister Xiaowei, have you permed the Noodles before? My mother's hair has also been permed, and then it became curly. No. Yu Xiaowei could still understand Nan Jiaoyu's meaning. She giggled and said, Noodles' hair has always been curly. It's been like this since it was very young. It's because of its curly hair that I call it Noodles. Haha, Noodles and steamed bun, these 2 names are so interesting. Chen Shiyin belatedly laughed. Speaking of steamed bun arrived. Steamed bun was originally playing in the backyard. Perhaps it heard the noise, so it ran around in a circle and wagged its tail beside Shishi. Of course, its gaze finally fell on Noodles. Why is there another dog? Steamed bun didn't know if it was worried that its position would be replaced or something else, but it kept circling around Shishi. It even bared its teeth at Noodles, trying to scare it. Teddy was a very brave dog. Even though steamed bun was several times bigger than it, it was still fearless. It got up from the ground and barked twice at steamed bun's head. Steamed bun was stunned. It didn't expect this little thing to not be afraid of it. Steamed bun, Noodles is a guest. Shishi was worried that they would fight, so she quickly hugged steamed bun's neck and comforted him. You can't fight. Steamed bun obviously wouldn't argue with this little dog. Moreover, there were so many guests at home today. The smart steamed bun knew that he couldn't be fierce to the guests. Moreover, steamed bun, who was hugged by its little master, immediately glanced at the little dog proudly. It wagged its tail vigorously and licked its little master's face to please her. Hee hee, steamed bun, stop licking me. Shishi shrunk her head back and laughed happily while pushing steamed bun's head. Steamed bun was elated. Its proud little eyes seemed to say, that's right, that's right. How can this little thing be prettier than me? Its hair is red. How can it be as pure as my golden hair? Its body isn't good either. It's too weak to stand up to the wind. One push and it will fall over. Also, is its tail wagging prettier than mine? However, Noodles was a little interested in steamed bun. It even dared to tease an Alaskan Malamute. How bold! After steamed bun ignored it, Noodles excitedly came over and jumped up and down, wanting to play with Steamed Bun. Steamed Bun circled around the crowd to prevent Noodles from catching up. After running 2 steps, he turned his head and glanced back proudly. Hee hee, they're having a lot of fun. She saw that the atmosphere between Steamed Bun and Noodles wasn't as tense as before. In fact, it seemed a little joyful. She relaxed and happily said to her friends. At this time, Tong Tong finally confirmed that the foreign girl he was looking forward to wasn't going to appear. He regretfully withdrew his gaze from the door. However, even if the foreign girl was gone, there were other sisters. Tong Tong happily ran over to Yu Xiaowei, who he liked very much and had a super gentle personality. He happily stuffed his little hand into Yu Xiaowei's, wanting her to hold his hand and walk with him. Tong Tong still remembered that Yu Xiaowei had accompanied him downstairs to play alone. Chapter 12:19. Was Yang Yi really going to let Steamed Bun be bullied by Noodle? Of course not. After all, Steamed Bun was still loved by everyone. Yang Yi didn't want Steamed Bun, a purebred Chinese rural dog, to be skewered. If there were a bunch of puppies in the house, it would be very troublesome. Therefore, after Yang Yi finished laughing, he came up with an idea that couldn't be considered his original idea. A few minutes later, Yang Yi appeared in the yard again, but this time, he was holding 2 plastic bags and a pair of scissors in his hands. After rubbing Steamed Bun's legs once, Noodle temporarily calmed down, but Steamed Bun still avoided this perverted little guy with lingering fear. Even though it would roll around and play with Whitey on the lawn, Steamed Bun would still quickly get up and run away when Noodle came over to fawn on it. Who knew if this perverted Noodle would take advantage of it when it was lying down to have another pervert? But Noodle was very thick-skinned. When Steamed Bun didn't want to play with it, it would stop in place and stare blankly for a while. Soon, it would forget about the past and shamelessly walk over. Seeing this, Yang Yi smiled, squatted down, and waved at Steamed Bun. Steamed Bun was still very obedient. When it heard the big master's call, it ran over. Today's situation is special. Why do I have to put on diapers for you? You understand, right? Yang Yi rubbed Steamed Bun's head and laughed. Steamed Bun obviously didn't understand. It just wagged its tail and sniffed the plastic bag in its master's hand. The smell is a bit familiar. Of course it's familiar. Yang Yi just went back and rummaged through the cupboard. He found the remaining diapers from Tong Tong and took out 2 bags. I'll put one on you first, but wait. After Yang Yi opened the diapers, he skillfully spread them out, but he didn't tear off the sticky paper. Instead, he gestured at Steamed Bun's but then took out a pair of scissors and quickly cut out a medium-sized hole. Don't move. Yang Yi rubbed Steamed Bun's head and said, It's almost done. It won't hurt. Even though the conversation was a little awkward, Yang Yi didn't think too much about it. He started to wrap the baby's diaper, and pulled out the baby's long and thin tail that he had cut earlier. Steamed Bun was very obedient. He didn't twist his but to avoid being touched. Instead, he stood there obediently without moving. However, when Yang Yi touched his tail, Steamed Bun turned his head and looked at his master with melancholy eyes. The look in his eyes was a little strange. No matter what, Yang Yi still helped Steamed Bun put on his diaper. Then he helped Whitey put on his diaper as well. After all, Bai Bai was Lan Xian's dog. He wasn't as familiar with Yang Yi as Steamed Bun. At first, he was a little unwilling, but in the end Bai Bai couldn't escape from Yang Yi's demonic claws. Why are you moving? This is for your own good. You don't understand. Yang Yi's big hand pressed down hard, and Bai Bai couldn't break free anymore. He said with a smile as he struggled to wrap the diaper around Bai Bai. The Tong Tong diaper was about the same size for Steamed Bun, but for the larger Samoyed, this diaper was a little small. Yang Yi could only tighten it as much as possible. Fortunately, Bai Bai's hair was fluffy. After compressing it, the diaper was stuck halfway to his body. However, Bai Bai was a tragedy. He was like a shaved Samoyed. His butt had shrunk by a lot. Compared to the fluffy and beautiful hair in the front, Bai Bai's butt was a little hard to look at. Yang Yi held back his laughter, let go of Bai Bai and said, Okay, go play. Bai Bai hurriedly ran away. However, with the diaper on, Bai Bai felt uncomfortable walking. He had to look back from time to time. Steamed Bun was fine. He seemed to be very adaptable. At first he was walking unsteadily, but now he was jumping up and down. He even went to Bye-Bye's butt and sniffed it. Yang Yi looked at the two big dog girls who were wearing safety pants. He clapped his hands with satisfaction and stood up. The whole scene of him putting on diapers for the two dogs was watched by Noodles. When Noodles saw him stand up, it was so scared that it hurriedly ran away, afraid that it would also be ravaged. However, Noodles thought too much. Yang Yi was not interested in it. After he was done, Yang Yi tidied up the trash that he had just cut and torn. He went back to the house and prepared delicious food for the children who were busy drawing. At the stairs, Shishi and the others were drawing happily. In fact, not every child liked to draw, and not every child was good at drawing. For example, Shishi and Yu Xiaowei had taken drawing classes. Even if they were drawing with chalk, they had unique ideas and could draw very delicate and beautiful drawings. However, for Chen Shiyin and Lu Xiaoyu, they had no talent or interest in drawing. They could only follow their friends and draw simple flowers, suns, and so on. But it didn't matter. Whether the painting looked good or not was another matter. What made the little ones happy was the feeling of being able to paint with so many good friends. Wow, Exionaire, what are you drawing? It's like a football. Hee hee, it's a watermelon. I didn't know what to draw at first, but after I ate the watermelon just now, I thought, why don't I draw a big watermelon? Look, I'm drawing the pattern on the watermelon skin. Grandma Wu told me that watermelons like this are the best. Just like how Lan Xian introduced her paintings to her friends when they asked her about them. She was able to bring about a lot of laughter during this period. Shiyin, why did you draw so many flowers? And they are all different colors. You're so good. Of course, I worked hard to draw them. Although Chen Shiyin's drawing was not very good, she was praised by her friends for her ingenious little tricks. She felt a great sense of accomplishment. Of course, there were also people like Shishi. She could almost never finish drawing her own drawings because Lu Xiaoyu, Nan Zhaoyu, and other friends always asked Shishi for help. Shishi, help me take a look. How do I draw this? How do I draw this? Lu Xiaoyu's calls came one after another. Coming. Hee hee. Shishi's response was always full of enthusiasm. Of course, Yu Xiaowei could not draw well because there was a little boy beside her who wanted to join in the fun. Tong Tong did not think that he was causing trouble. He held the different colored chalks enthusiastically and stood on his tiptoes to help Sister Xiaowei draw. In the end, he always messed up Sister Xiaowei's drawing. Fortunately, Yu Xiaowei did not mind. When Tong Tong came over, she was very concerned and moved aside to make room for Tong Tong. Lan Xian did not know how long they played, but she felt a little bored. She put down the chalk and ran to the kitchen. She used the excuse of washing her hands to see what delicious food Papa Yang was making. Hungry? Try some of these soda biscuits that have already been made. Later, when Papa Yang finishes making the pudding and sugar, he'll give them to you, Yang Yi said with a smile. Candies? Lan Xian went over to take a look. When she saw crushed peanuts, glutinous rice balls, and so on, she immediately danced with joy. Wow, this is it. This is super delicious. Then I'll come back later. Wait for 10 minutes. Yang Yi said with a smile. Lan Xian happily took the 2 biscuits and walked out of the kitchen. However, she did not go back to draw. Instead, she ate the biscuits and walked around to the door. When she saw the scene in front of her, she cried out in surprise. Wow. Shishi. Steamed Bun is in trouble. He stole Mommy's pants to wear. Lan Xian's loud voice resounded through the entire house. Chapter 12:20. Time flew by quickly. After Murphy finished her concert in Star City, October's golden autumn quietly arrived in Jiangcheng, which was once unbearably hot. Or perhaps the continuous autumn rain sounded the horn of climate change. But after one night, Jiangcheng was covered in fallen leaves, and it was chilly. Of course, for the children, they still didn't have a very strong concept of autumn. The rainy day was just a good reason for them to wear their beloved cartoon water shoes and a big raincoat. Their father held their little hands and sent them to school in a cute manner. But today it wasn't raining. Xixi at school realized the unique charm of autumn from another perspective. After the morning break, the third class was language class. Teacher Li Ruolin came to the class early and stood on the podium. While answering questions from a few diligent students, she was also waiting for class to begin. Xixi, Lu Xiaoyu and Lan Xian came back late. They took advantage of the good weather and went downstairs to play shuttlecock with Yu Xiaowei. But when the bell rang, the girls ran back with bell-like laughter. As a result, just as they reached the door, they looked up. Teacher. Including Xixi, the three girls were shocked and stuck out their tongues in embarrassment. Although Li Ruolin didn't blame them, she just smiled and motioned them to go back to their seats. The class was about to begin, but Xixi and the others didn't dare to play around anymore. They all ran back to their seats. In contrast, Xixi and Lan Xian were well behaved. At least, they came back before class. Behind them, there were other children who came back one after another. Jiang Chen was the last to come back. He rushed in from the outside 3 to 4 minutes after the bell rang. Not only that, but this guy didn't feel embarrassed about being late. When he rushed in and saw Li Ruolin standing on the podium, he excitedly reported to Li Ruolin. Teacher, Teacher Chen from the 9th class just took them to see the osmanthus flowers after class. I heard that the osmanthus flowers in the school bloomed. It's beautiful. Jiang Chen danced as he described. Excitement and anticipation were written all over his face. Perhaps it was the charm of the osmanthus flower, or perhaps it was a wonderful thing to have a teacher take the students to explore the outdoors. After listening to Jiang Chen's description, Li Ruolin didn't say anything, but the other children in the classroom couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. When Li Ruolin saw this, she waved her hand and smiled. Then let's hurry up and go to class. Later, let's go see the osmanthus flowers 10 minutes before class ends, okay? Wow. At this moment, the children in the class cheered even more enthusiastically. Even Xixi was the same. The little girl clapped her hands excitedly, looked at the teacher with a longing expression, and cheered with her classmates. But this can also be considered a small teaching task. After you're done appreciating the osmanthus flowers, you have to remember your feelings and write it down in your diary tonight. I will check it. Li Ruolin smiled. So what? When the children thought that they could do outdoor activities during class and see the beautiful and fragrant osmanthus flowers, they no longer cared about this little homework. Finally, the boring class came to an end, but Li Ruolin still kept her promise. She raised her hand and saw that she had already taught the little guys for 30 minutes. She waved her hand and asked them to go downstairs. Don't make any noise on the stairs. If anyone talks too loudly, they can't go see the osmanthus flowers with everyone. They can only be punished by going back to the classroom to help everyone watch the classroom. With Li Ruolin's warning, when the little guys went downstairs, they were quite obedient. Although they were exuberant, only their eyes were smiling. The large group of children only had a few whispers left as they went downstairs in low spirits. Of course, the naughty boys still made a little noise. For example, Chen Yuxuan and a few other boys skipped down the stairs. In the end, when they were 2 steps away, they jumped down with big strides. Their shoes made a crisp sound on the stairs. Don't disturb other people's class. Xixi was also excitedly holding hands with Lu Xiaoyu as they walked in front. When she saw the boys making so much noise, she couldn't help but call out softly. Xixi was worried that if everyone made too much noise, a teacher would come out and stop them from seeing the osmanthus flowers. However, Xixi's warning didn't have any effect. Her voice didn't reach the ears of the unruly boys at all. They took the lead and ran down the stairs proudly. Like heroes, they didn't know shame at all and posed strangely. Fortunately, when everyone walked to the campus, no teacher came to reprimand them. When they could talk, Xixi finally breathed a sigh of relief. She happily said to Lu Xiaoyu, "Little you, let me tell you. I know where the osmanthus flowers are. My daddy told me last year." "Really? How did your daddy know?" Lu Xiaoyu asked curiously. At the same time, she also opened up Xixi's chatterbox. The 2 girls chattered along the way, and their pleasant laughter drifted out among the other students' voices. Li Ruolin brought the children to the corner of the campus where a few osmanthus plants were planted. The osmanthus plants were tall and straight with lush foliage. The children wanted to look at them, but they had to try hard to raise their heads. Fortunately, although the osmanthus leaves were green and dense, its golden flower clusters were like stars in the sky, blooming all over the osmanthus trees. The children didn't need to look hard to see the osmanthus flowers that they had been looking forward to the whole class. Wow! It's so beautiful! She didn't know how to use beautiful words to describe it. She could only stare obsessively at the clusters of delicate and small flowers that seemed to be shining with a golden light, and exclaim softly, "Which student would like to describe to me the osmanthus flowers that you have observed?" Li Ruolin asked with a smile. This kind of outdoor class could still arouse the interest of the students. Not only were the few students with good grades in the class fighting to answer, but Chen Yuxuan also raised his hand excitedly. "Chen Yuxuan, you answer." Li Ruolin smiled and called out his name. "This flower is especially beautiful. It's yellow and looks like popcorn. It's very small and very beautiful." Chen Yuxuan was a little nervous as he stammered out his thoughts. "Very good answer. Chen Yuxuan's observation is very detailed." Li Ruolin smiled and applauded Chen Yuxuan. This praise was very rare for Chen Yuxuan. The expression on the little boy's face was a little flattered. "Which child would like to add on?" Li Ruolin asked with a smile. Suddenly, more children raised their hands. She was the same. She excitedly raised her small hand high. After all, she was the tallest in the class. The little girl wanted to share her experience with everyone, so she was very eager for the teacher to see her raised hand. "Liao Qianqian, you answer." Li Ruolin didn't call out Xixi, but called out the name of the first student that raised her hand. Xixi was a little regretful and looked at Liao Qianqian nervously. The little girl's big eyes were filled with uneasiness. She secretly prayed, "Qianqian, don't say what I want to say." Chapter 12:21. Under Xixi worried gaze, Liao Qianqian said to Teacher Li, "Teacher, osmanthus flowers have 4 petals." "That's not my answer." Xixi regained her joyful expression. Moreover, the little girl began to secretly muster up a burst of energy. She moved stealthily with small steps. She wanted to stand right in front of the teacher. This way, she would be able to seize the opportunity to answer first later. On Li Ruolin's side, she was a little surprised as she praised Liao Qianqian. "Qianqian, your observation is very detailed. Osmanthus flowers are so tall, and you can see that they have 4 petals. Not bad. Because I have an osmanthus flower." Liao Qianqian giggled as she fidgeted for a moment before she stretched out her hidden right hand from behind her back and opened it for the teacher to see. An osmanthus flower the size of a grain of rice was quietly lying on it. Wow! Seeing this scene, the girls surrounding Liao Qianqian all exclaimed in surprise. Lu Xiaoyu also abandoned Xixi and couldn't help but go over and put her hands on the shoulders of the student in front of her. She stared at the osmanthus flower with undisguised envy in her eyes. At this moment, class monitor Chao Ruolin's agitated voice rang from the side. "How can you pluck the flower? Liao Qianqian, it's wrong for you to pluck the flower. The flower is so beautiful, we can't destroy it. Otherwise, no one will be able to see it." Actually, Chao Ruolin's intentions were good. This little girl was very upright and did things enthusiastically. But sometimes she couldn't accept even a grain of sand in her eyes and spoke bluntly. This kind of inappropriate reprimand would often appear, which made it difficult for the other children to have a good impression of her. Liao Qianqian was unconvinced and felt wronged as she pouted her lips. She clenched her hands as if she was afraid that someone would snatch her osmanthus flower away, and retracted her little fist into her arms as she shouted to Chao Ruolin. "Who said I plucked the flower? I picked it up from the ground. The flower fell down by itself." It's okay. Flowers that fall from the ground can be picked up because if we don't pick them up, they will be treated as trash and swept away." Li Ruolin quickly smiled and comforted her. "But the class leader is right. We have to remember to protect nature. When we admire the osmanthus flowers, we can't reach out and destroy their beauty." Chao Ruolin also felt that she had said something wrong. She scratched her head embarrassedly. But the little girl had her own pride and had no intention of apologizing. Liao Qianqian glared at her angrily, and was no longer willing to take out the osmanthus flowers for her to see. The teacher's mediation and consolation did not affect the other students. Instead, Liao Qianqian's words had inspired them. That's right. The osmanthus flowers on the tree were too tall to be picked. They could only look at them from afar. However, there were some osmanthus flowers on the ground that had been blown down by the wind. These were within reach. The children who liked these little golden flowers couldn't help but lower their heads to look for them. Shishi didn't look for him. She waited for a while and finally couldn't help but whisper to the teacher. Teacher, teacher. Yangshi, what's wrong? Li Ruolin asked with a smile. I have another discovery. Can I share it with everyone? Shishi looked at the teacher expectantly. Sure. Li Ruolin smiled. You tell us. The little girl who finally got what she wanted had a smile as bright as the osmanthus flowers. She raised her voice and said happily, Yes, yes. That's right. Teacher, I realized that the osmanthus flowers are very fragrant. Smell it. Wow, it's so fragrant. Shishi said as she sniffed hard with her little nose. Then, her little face was filled with an intoxicated expression. Shishi wasn't acting. It was really fragrant. This was because the osmanthus flowers on the tree had all bloomed. They were like fine golden grains hanging on the tree. Under the warm morning sun, the osmanthus flowers emitted a refreshing fragrance. The fragrance of so many flowers diffused and gathered, making it seem extra rich. If one sniffed hard, they would feel as if their entire body was surrounded by the osmanthus fragrance. It was an intoxicating feeling. Even smelling the fragrance of the osmanthus flowers, Shishi didn't want to continue describing it. Her intoxicated appearance had already had an effect. Many children were infected by her. They didn't even lower their heads to look for the scattered osmanthus flowers on the ground. Instead, they imitated Shishi and raised their heads to take a deep breath. Looking at the golden flowers swaying gently in the breeze, the little girl's eyes couldn't help but become infatuated. In the evening, when Shishi saw her father, she was carefully holding something wrapped in her handkerchief. Of course, the little girl was in a good mood. She couldn't wait to run to her father's side and said, Papa, Papa, guess what this is? How could he guess? Yang Yi had no choice but to make two random guesses. Cece then giggled and said, Oh no, it's osmanthus flower. Papa, look. The little girl carefully unwrapped the handkerchief in her palm, revealing a few osmanthus flowers carefully wrapped inside. Then she held it up high for her father to see. Daddy Yang, smell it, smell it. Lan Xian giggled beside him as she bounced left and right. Not bad, it's very fragrant. Where did you get these osmanthus flowers? Yang Yi lowered his head and pretended to smell it, then praised it. Of course, he didn't really smell the osmanthus flowers. After all, they had fallen for some time, and the smell had already dissipated. We picked them up. We didn't pick them up. Shishi was still worried that her father would misunderstand, so she quickly explained. The teacher said that we can pick up the flowers that fell from the grass, but we can't pick the flowers from the trees. Sitting in the car, the little girl chatted with Lan Xian and told her father that their teacher had taken them to see the osmanthus flowers today. After that, Shishi still said, Papa, the osmanthus flowers on the tree are even more beautiful. But you didn't see them. When the car stopped at the intersection and waited for the red light, Shishi came up and shouted, Papa, don't move. When Yang Yi wanted to turn his head to see what she was doing, Lan Xian also helped to shout, Don't move, because it will fall. Yang Yi saw that there was still nearly a minute to wait for the red light, so he smiled and didn't move. But he could see from the center rear-view mirror that Shishi had taken out an osmanthus flower from her handkerchief and was attentively putting it on her father's temple. Was she adding a headdress for herself? Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he didn't stop her. He just sat there and let Shishi do what she wanted. Will it fall? Lan Xian asked worriedly. Shishi tried hard to put the flower between Yang Yi's hair and ears. Fortunately, Yang Yi's hair had grown a little longer recently, and the hard stubble of his hair could hold the flower. It should be fine. It won't fall, right? Shishi withdrew her hand and looked at it for a while, then said happily, "Papa, look, is it beautiful?" Yang helplessly looked at the rearview mirror and said against his will, "Well, it's very beautiful." She didn't hear her father's inner struggle. She felt a little regretful and said, "Oh, I don't think it's the most beautiful, because there are too few flowers. It would be more beautiful if there were more flowers." Cough, cough, no need. She, sit down and fasten your seatbelt. We're going to drive. Yang said quickly. After she sat back, she continued to explain, "Because there are two left, I didn't pick up many. These two are for Mom and Brother." She wanted to make Mom and Brother beautiful. Chapter 12:22. As she gradually grew up, a girl's desire for beauty was also vividly reflected in her body. Of course, Shishi's desire for beauty was not limited to wearing beautiful clothes and tying up beautiful hair. She was also willing to dress up beautifully in everything in life. To Shishi, using osmanthus flowers to make a head ornament for her father was just a small experiment for her. At home, the one that received the most special treatment from Shishi was none other than the Theodore grand piano in the side hall. It was not as simple as Shishi and Tong Tong putting their own dolls and toys on it after it was bought back at the beginning. In the past half a month, Shishi had put some cartoon stickers on the piano one after another. Some were asked by Shishi from Lan Xian, and some were found in books by Shishi herself. For example, the children's magazine that Yang subscribed to for Shishi was newly published by Sahara Publishing in recent months. It was a fun, informative, and educational children's magazine. In its packaging, there were often some very delicate paper molds or some very interesting, and had a certain promotional effect, cartoon stickers. When Shishi put the stickers on for the first time, Yang was a little depressed. After all, the original black paint of the piano was very pure and almost flawless. However, with the cartoon stickers, it was like a beautiful woman with a Peppa Pig tattoo on her white and clean arm. It suddenly made people feel that the high-end and stable temperament of the piano was gone. However, Shishi had already put the stickers on. If he were to forcefully scratch them off, not only would he disappoint Shishi, but he might also scratch the original paint. Therefore, Yang could only turn a blind eye. In the end, Shishi put a little too much stickers on the piano, and the piano became more and more cute. The girl's heart was full, and Yang felt that it was easier to accept. However, when Yang heard that Shishi wanted to go back and use the osmanthus flowers to make a head ornament for Tong Tong, he could not sit still. Ahem, Shishi, do you know what other uses this osmanthus flowers have? Yang smiled and changed the topic. I don't know. Papa, what other uses are there? Shishi asked curiously. Yang said slowly, osmanthus flowers have a very long history in our country, especially in our generation in Jiangnan. It has been loved for a long time, not only because it looks good and smells good, but also because it can be used to make osmanthus tea or osmanthus cakes. Therefore, it has the use to eat. It can be eaten? Cece murmured to her father in surprise, and then lowered her head to look at the two small osmanthus flowers in her handkerchief. Can these osmanthus flowers be eaten? Lan Xian had been listening curiously. When she heard osmanthus cakes, she blinked and said doubtfully, "Hey, I think I've eaten osmanthus cakes before." She had an impression of the name. Yang said with a smile, "The method of making osmanthus cakes is very simple. You can use glutinous rice flour or chestnut powder. The osmanthus cakes made from glutinous rice flour are more sticky. They taste like glutinous rice paste, glutinous rice balls, and pumpkin cakes. Sprinkled with sugar and osmanthus, this osmanthus cake is soft, fragrant, and delicious. But the osmanthus cakes made from chestnut powder are a little different. The cakes made from chestnut powder are a bit like jelly, and they have a chewy feeling when you bite them." Listening to Papa Yang's description, Lan Xian had forgotten the taste of the osmanthus cakes she had eaten before. However, in Papa Yang's vivid description, the delicious snacks she had eaten at Shishi's house one by one appeared in her mind. The little girl was so hungry that she was about to drool. Lan Xian couldn't help it. She took out her school bag and rummaged through it. Like Shishi, she took out a small handkerchief and opened it. There were also a few small and cute osmanthus flowers wrapped in it. Papayong, I also have osmanthus flowers here. I'll give them to you. Can you make osmanthus cakes for me? Lan Xian tried her best to ask in a well-behaved voice. I also want to try osmanthus cakes made from osmanthus flowers. Shishi looked eagerly at Lan Xian's osmanthus flowers and echoed. Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head gently and said, I don't think that's possible. You have too few osmanthus flowers. Of course, Yang Yi didn't let Shishi and Lan Xian down for too long. He continued, but it doesn't matter. Tomorrow, I'll go to the market and buy some dried osmanthus flowers that others have already made. When I come back, I'll make some osmanthus cakes for you to try. Only then did Cici and Lan Xian begin to cheer happily. And the car was once again filled with laughter that was as sweet as the osmanthus flowers. Autumn was getting stronger. On the training island of Wu County in Jinling City, the crew of The Truman Show was in full swing, shooting this movie that hadn't received much publicity in the outside world. However, because the weather had suddenly turned cold, Du Yuanlei was worried that the temperature and water temperature would drop further. Moreover, after the rain, the river rose and the waves became bigger. She arranged for the filming of the last scene of the movie to be prioritized. The Truman Show's attempt to escape from the sea. This was a big challenge for Guizhi, who was the lead actor of The Truman Show. Although he grew up in Jiangnan and was naturally good at swimming, after all, the weather was cold now. Filming on the river and in the river was really a torturous thing. That morning, Guizhi faced an even bigger challenge. Everyone came to the shore early. Taking advantage of the fact that it didn't rain last night and the weather was still good, they prepared to shoot the scene where the Truman Show was suppressed by the show's storm technology at sea. In the scene, the Truman Show had to struggle on the surface of the sea in the storm, hugging the side of the sailboat. In reality, Guizhi was soaking in the cold river at around 4 o'clock. Facing the rain and big waves from the prop boats next to him, he tried his best to act as if he was struggling in despair. Although the water here was not deep and there were lifeguards swimming around at any time, so the possibility of danger was not high. But seeing Guizhi's face turn blue from the cold, still being sprayed and slapped by the waves, and seeing him holding onto the side of the sailboat and being sprayed all over the place, Ding Xiang, who was standing next to everyone on the filming boat, had a terrible, nervous, and worried look on her face. Ding Xiang, who grew up in the mountains, was a little seasick. In the morning, she vomited a few times, so naturally, she looked terrible. However, she was still worried about Guizhi. She took seasickness medicine and insisted on coming along. Cut. Xiaogua, come up and rest first. We'll reshoot this scene later. Du Yuanlei waved the red flag, signaling for the prop boat's water gun to stop. Then she walked to the side of the boat and shouted to Guizhi. Guizhi broke free from the lifeguard who wanted to help him. As he stepped on the water to keep his head above water, he panted and said, "It's okay, director. I can still hold on. Let's do it again. If we drag it out, it'll be dawn soon. I'll definitely act out this scene. Take a break first." Ding Xiang's hand tightly grasped an unopened umbrella. Her tired eyes fell on Guizhi, whose lips had turned blue from the cold. She couldn't help but blurt out, but just as she opened her mouth, her voice was a little hoarse and low, and it was drowned out by the noise of the engine. Ding Xiang knew how desperate Guizhi was when he worked. She also saw the determination in his eyes, so when she wanted to persuade him again, her lips moved but no sound came out. Du Yuanlei hesitated and asked Guizhi about his condition again before reluctantly agreeing. There was a little admiration in her voice as she said, "Then let's do one more scene. Xiaogua, not only do you have to show a struggling expression, you also have to show that you're about to lose your grip at any time, like you're about to drown. Then, in this desperate situation, burst out with a strong will to survive, understand?" After that, Du Yuanlei added in a very strict tone, "After this scene, no matter what, you have to come up and rest for 15 minutes. Guizhi nodded, and the lifeguard left his side. The prop boat's water gun began to spray again. Fortunately, Guizhi was indeed tired this time. He first plunged his body into the water and immersed himself in Truman's thoughts and situation. The hidden fatigue in his body burst out. He floated up and struggled with his hands and feet. On the filming boat, everyone stood up nervously and looked at Guizi, because this scene looked like he was about to drown. Even the lifeguard could not help but move a little not far away. Ding Xiang staggered and wanted to stand up. Long and I quickly supported her, but Ding Xiang's gaze only fell on Guizi. She did not cry, but only supported her body with determination. She bit her lips so hard that they were about to bleed. However, Guizi was still swimming. In the end, he screamed desperately and grabbed the rope of the sailboat's side in the wind and waves. Guizi's head surfaced from the water. It was not obvious that he was acting. He was shivering from the cold, and even his breathing was shaking. He struggled, grabbed the fallen sail, and climbed up. Cut. This scene is done. Chapter 12:23. Guizi had caught a cold and had a fever because he had been in the water for too long during filming. Yang Yi only found out about the news from Yang Huan the next morning. After learning about it, he quickly drove to Jinling City to visit the kid. However, as Shishi had to go to school, Murphy and Tong Tong stayed at home. Jinling was quite a distance away from Jiangcheng. Yang Yi left around noon and arrived at the construction site around 5 in the afternoon. The cable car had not been built yet, so they had to take a boat to get to the training island. Hence, Yang Yi parked his car at the Lanzhou Kai Construction Company station. Wu County Town had changed a lot because of the amusement park. Yang Yi saw many new buildings being built along the way. These were the actions of other real estate companies. They had received news from various sources that Yang Yi's amusement park was huge. Hence, they had entered Wu County Town early to buy land, build houses, and hype up the real estate market in Wu County Town. Of course, this was a good thing for Lanzhou Kai. He was also in the real estate business. As mentioned before, when Lanzhou Kai helped Yang Yi get the land for the amusement park, he had also bought a large piece of land around the amusement park and the Yang family's ancestral hall. Currently, he was working on 2 fronts. One was the construction site for the second phase of the amusement park, and the other was the construction site for a new residential area. By the time the boat arrived at the training island, the sky had already darkened. Yang Yi was still on the boat. He had apologized to Shishi, who had returned home from school but could not see her father. However, to his surprise, when Yang Yi saw Guizi, he realized that the kid was not as miserable as he had imagined. Yang Huan had said that Guizi had fallen sick while filming in the river. However, Yang Yi had thought that Guizi was bedridden. However, in the makeshift room where Guizi and Ding Xiang were staying, Yang Yi saw Guizi hugging his blanket and chatting happily with Ding Xiang. When Yang Yi knocked on the door and entered, Guizi saw Yang Yi. He quickly got off the bed and wanted to greet Yang Yi. "Brother Yang, why are you here?" Guizi's voice had a strong nasal sound. He looked at Yang Yi and scratched his head embarrassedly. "Didn't I hear that you were sick? So, I came to see you and visit your shift." Yang Yi smiled and waved his hand, indicating that Guizi should lie back down. He then sat down on the chair that Ding Xiang had brought for him. The living environment on the training island was not too bad. Although it was just a simple makeshift house, due to the setting, it looked like a 2-story bungalow with a lawn. Although the makeshift houses provided for the crew were single rooms, they were very large and had all the basic living facilities, including kitchen utensils. Ding Xiang had already cooked and was about to eat with Guizi. However, when she saw Yang Yi, she quickly washed the rice again and prepared to cook some porridge with the induction cooker. Then she cooked 2 more dishes to entertain Yang Yi. "It's just a small cold. I'm too embarrassed to tell you that I've delayed the filming." Guizi scratched his head shyly and coughed before continuing. "Brother Yang, I'm really sorry to have troubled you to come here. It's just a small illness." "What trouble? I don't have anything else to do anyway." Yang Yi waved his hand and looked at Ding Xiang, who was busy next to him. He smiled and said, "If you want to say that it's troublesome, you have to thank Ding Xiang first. She must be very tired to take care of you while filming on the island, right?" Ding Xiang looked up and smiled. "How could that be? I only cooked for him because he was sick for the past 2 days to replenish his nutrition. I can't do anything special because everyone is on the set, so we can eat whatever we want." Guizi shook his head and took credit for his girlfriend. He said in a nasal voice, No, Brother Yang, I really should thank Sister Ding Xiang. You don't know, when we came back from filming on the river yesterday, Sister Ding Xiang was already seasick and very uncomfortable, but she insisted on taking care of me. I was so touched. Ding Xiang is seasick? You have to have a good rest. Yang Yi quickly stood up and took away the work in Ding Xiang's hands. No, Brother Yang, I've already recovered. Ding Xiang naturally refused. She even stomped her feet and said to Guizi, Hey Xiaogua, don't make Brother Yang worry about me again. Guizi scratched his head and laughed a little embarrassedly. She felt that her life was a lot less colorful when her father wasn't at home for a day. Especially when she woke up the next day and didn't have her father to send her to school for breakfast. The little girl missed her father even more. When she arrived at school, she complained to Lu Xiaoyu. Little you, my papa isn't at home again. I miss him so much. Mom doesn't cook well. She only knows how to scramble eggs, and I ate a lot of eggs. Mom taught me how to play the piano last night. Then I felt that Mom wasn't fun, so I couldn't understand what she was saying. My papa will read books with me at night. Then sometimes he will tell me stories. Last night, Papa wasn't at home, so I could only read books by myself. The little girl rambled on, but in fact, she was just describing how much she missed her father. Lu Xiaoyu was also a very good listener. She listened to Xishi's narration and cooperated with her to make expressions of sadness and worry. It seemed that she also felt the same as Xishi. Finally, Lu Xiaoyu waited for Xishi to finish before she asked curiously, Xishi, why isn't your father at home? Because my papa is on a business trip. Xishi blinked and replied. At this time, Jiang Chen, who happened to pass by Xishi, stopped in his tracks. He frowned and looked at Xishi. He didn't hear what Xishi said before, but now he heard Xishi say that her father was on a business trip. On a business trip. My father sometimes goes on business trips, but my mother is better. My mother and I are still very happy at home. Lu Xiaoyu said. But I still like my papa. Xishi pouted her small mouth, twisted her little butt on the chair, and said unhappily, Hee, I know your father is super nice, I also like your father. Lu Xiaoyu and Xishi laughed and comforted their little friend. Aya, Xishi, don't worry, your father is on a business trip and will be back soon. At this time, Jiang Chun, who had been listening, suddenly shouted at Xishi with red eyes. Don't let your father go on a business trip, then your father won't come back. Most men on business trips are bad guys. What? Xishi was a little confused by his roar, and didn't understand what Jiang Chun was saying. The problem was that after Jiang Chun finished yelling, he ran away with his head down, leaving the two girls looking at each other in confusion. What is going on? Chapter 12:24. Because he was usually too naughty, Xishi didn't like to play with him. Therefore, although Xishi was inexplicably yelled at by him, and Xishi didn't hear what he said clearly and he ran away, it only made the little girl confused for a while. Xishi quickly put this matter to the back of her mind, and didn't ask for his opinion. When school ended in the evening, Xishi was pleasantly surprised to find that her father, who didn't come back last night, came to pick her up. The little girl was ecstatic and didn't remember the small incident in the morning. After Yang Yi returned from Jinling, it didn't take long for him to finally wait for Huijia Primary School's parent opening day. This was the big day that Yang Yi and Murphy had been looking forward to for a long time. Not to mention Shishi's performance, just visiting the child's school, accompanying the child in a teaching demonstration class, and seeing the child's life in school. These were enough to make these parents feel satisfied. Murphy was even more excited than Yang Yi. Today, she woke up early and frowned in front of the closet. She took out a stack of clothes and gestured in front of her as she muttered. What kind of clothes do you think I should wear? Something sporty? Or something more fashionable? Isn't there a PE class? Should I wear sneakers? Do you think a parent, especially a female parent, will be allowed to run in PE class? Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just wear something normal. Don't be too extravagant. It's not good in front of the child. How do you know there isn't such a program? Maybe the teacher will say, since so many parents are here today, let's have a parent-child competition. Murphy still spoke with a rough voice and imitated the PE teacher in her impression. Then she recovered her voice. So since I have to wear normal clothes, I'll wear sneakers. This way, I can deal with different situations. Murphy didn't just dress up for herself, she also dressed up for Yang Yi. After a while, two people with matching styles appeared in the mirror. Murphy wore an orange-red collared t-shirt and long beige casual pants, while Yang Yi wore a white striped collared t-shirt and khaki casual pants. Of course, this kind of outfit looked very old-fashioned on other people, but Yang Yi and Murphy were different. Mo Fei's figure was too good. Not only was she curvy, but her pair of long legs also made the casual pants look like a trendy street photo shoot. Furthermore, her exquisite and beautiful appearance made people forget about the flaws of her clothes. One look and they would be attracted to her. Yang Yi wasn't bad either. He was tall, burly, and had a well-defined face. Even if he wore casual clothes, he looked like a tight suit. His broad chest and thick arms made him look like a tough guy in the movies. He was quite stylish. Yang Yi looked carefully for a while and laughed. Do you know what I'm thinking? Murphy was satisfied. She asked casually, What are you thinking? Yang Yi said happily, I think we're not going to attend the open house of our daughter's school, but to play golf. Murphy took a closer look. It was true, but she was too embarrassed to admit it. She even elbowed Yang Yi and threatened him with her beautiful eyes. If you dare to talk nonsense, I'll be fierce. Yang Yi smiled and raised his hands to surrender. No, I think it's good to dress like this. It's low-key and classy. Yang Yi and Murphy were not the only ones who looked refreshing. Tong Tong was also dressed very handsomely. The little guy wore a zipped sports jacket, but the sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, the zipper was pulled up to the top, and the collar was raised. Then he wore a small cap upside down. Even though his little face was still a little chubby, Tong Tong now looked like a cool kid. However, her parents and brother were all dressed up very well. She could only wear her school uniform. Although the school-style girl looked good, she was already tired of wearing such clothes. You can all wear new clothes, but I can't. When the little girl got into the car, she was still pouting and unwilling. Interestingly, when they arrived at the school, they quickly realized that although Yang Yi's family and Lan Zhou's Kai's family had chosen to keep a low profile, the other parents were dressed more ostentatiously than the other. Or rather, they were dressed in fancy dresses, cheongsams, designer bags, high heels, belts, and so on. The most important thing was to know how to match and have good taste. For example, Liao Qianqian's mother wore a leather skirt, a windbreaker, and a small top hat. She stood out among the other mothers. Liao Qianqian's mother was still relatively young. She looked like she had given birth to Liao Qianqian when she was still in her 20s. In comparison, Liao Qianqian's father, a middle-aged man, looked like he could not keep up with his wife's pace. While Yang Yi was still secretly wondering why Liao Qianqian's father and mother were of different ages, Murphy moved to Yang Yi's side with a little grievance. I feel that we look a lot older wearing these clothes. Murphy muttered unhappily to Yang Yi. She was a little regretful. The clothes that she and Yang Yi were wearing looked good at home, but compared to the other parents, it was like osmanthus flowers meeting peonies. They could only be considered as pretty girls in a humble family. In public, they were overshadowed by other people's beautiful purples and brilliant reds. It's okay, we are here to watch Shishi's performance today. She is the main character. How can we steal the spotlight, right? Yang Yi smiled and comforted her. Murphy reluctantly accepted Yang Yi's comfort, but she did not have time to care about it. Because among the parents, as a big star, she quickly became the focus of everyone's attention. It could be said that if the parents were not a little embarrassed because their children were in front of them, they would have come over to greet Murphy happily. Perhaps Murphy would not be able to handle so many requests for autographs and photos today. When Shishi and the others were in the morning class, the school's teachers brought the parents to visit the various buildings in the school, the cultural promenade, the honor garden, etc. They even visited the school cafeteria where they were supposed to eat lunch with the children. Yang Yi and Murphy even visited it. Tong Tong was the most excited because he finally came to the legendary sister's school, which was also the strange place where his sister would disappear in broad daylight every day. Moreover, Unlike the last time when he could only look from outside, this time, Tong Tong could enter. This was what Tong Tong had been looking forward to, so the little guy refused to be carried by his parents. His little butt shook as he walked forward. If it was not for his father holding him, he would have rushed to the front. This is the place where Big Sister has her lunch. Later, we will also have lunch here with Big Sister. Yang Yi helped little Momo to relay the teacher's words. Little Momo frowned as he held his father's hand and looked around. He even turned back to look, but he was standing in the middle of a group of adults, and his vision was limited. He didn't want his father to hold him, so after looking around for a while, he used his two small hands to tug at his father's large hand to attract his attention. "Where is sister?" Tong Tong asked with a puzzled pout. "Soon. We will go to class with sister later." Yang Yi smiled and patted the little guy's head to comfort him. Chapter 12:25. Finally, I can go to Shishi's class for an open class. Yang Yi, Murphy, and Tong Tong followed the parents of the second grade class 3 to Shishi's classroom. The class had not started yet, but other than those who were in a hurry to use the restroom, the children still had to sit in their own chairs obediently. Teacher Li Ruolin was busy arranging the seats for the parents. There were some round stools placed in the middle of the aisle that did not take up much space. There were also stools placed at the back of the classroom and in front of the blackboard. As the parents sat down one after another, it was somewhat inconvenient for them to enter and leave. "Where's my sister?" After Tong Tong entered the classroom, he was still looking left and right. He even stood on his tiptoes to look for her. However, he was still too small and short. He could not see his sister over the high tables and tall adults. Therefore, he anxiously asked for his father. "She's over there." Yang Yi considered that the classroom was rather crowded, so he simply picked up the little boy and pointed in Shishi's direction with a smile. Tong Tong looked over. The first thing he saw was his sister, Shishi, happily waving at him. Of course, Shishi was also a little shy, because there were too many parents of other students present today. She did not dare to shout loudly, and could only wave her hands. "Sister." Little Swan and I immediately beamed with joy in his father's arms. He even shook his little fist excitedly. After seeing his sister, Tong Tong's eyes were no longer on anyone else. He obediently stayed in his father's arms and stared straight at his sister. He anxiously thought to himself, "Why is Daddy walking so slowly? Hurry up and go to sister." At this moment, a loud and clear voice suddenly rang out from the side. "Hua Hua." Before the little boy could notice, Yang Yi reminded him with a smile. "Hua Hua, look, Sister Xin is calling you." Tong Tong reluctantly turned his head. When he saw Lan Xian, he was surprised again. He pointed at Lan Xian and asked, "Where's Sister Xin?" Yang Yi and Lan Hao Kai behind him all laughed. He rubbed the little fellow's head and said, "You forgot that your Sister Xin is also your sister's classmate." Tong Tong really didn't have this concept. Later, when he went to his sister's side, he saw another familiar face, Sister Fishy. The little guy was surprised again. Putting aside the Tong Tong for now, Li Ruolin said to the parents, "Everyone, please sit down next to your child first. If you don't have enough space, there are still many seats behind." Yang Yi looked around. Although Shishi's seat was at the back, the aisle was still a little crowded. Lan Hao Kai had already consciously sat at the back of the classroom, leaving Wu Jingjing to accompany Lan Xian. "You and Hua Hua sit here. I'll go to the back," Yang Yi said to Murphy with a smile. Before Murphy could say anything, Shishi said anxiously, But I want Papa to listen to the class with me." Murphy suddenly covered her chest and looked at Yang Yi helplessly, indicating that she had been hit 10,000 times. "It's rare for Mommy to come to school. You should satisfy her wish. Good girl. Daddy can sit at the back and watch you in class. If you answer the questions positively, Daddy will be very happy." Yang Yi smiled and rubbed Shishi's little head. "But I still want Papa." Shishi pouted her little mouth, pulled her father's hand, and said unwillingly, Okay, don't you have 2 classes? In the next class, why don't you let your papa accompany you in front? We'll take turns to accompany you," Murphy said reproachfully. Really, you rely on your papa for everything. You don't even want mom anymore. Shishi reluctantly agreed. The class started. Tong Tong did not have a seat of his own, so he could only sit on his mother's lap. However, Murphy only sat on a round stool, which had limited support. Tong Tong was a little uncomfortable sitting on it. He curiously looked around for a while, and felt that his little, but was being pressed by his mother's lap. Oh, Tong Tong struggled to get out of his mother's arms. Murphy quickly hugged him tightly and scolded him seriously in a low voice. Don't make trouble, sister is in class. If you continue to disturb sister, I'll take you out. You can't go to class with sister anymore. However, Tong Tong had his own ideas. He pouted his mouth, snorted twice, and struggled in his mother's arms. He still did not give up and said, "Oh, I want to sit with sister." Although the teacher on the stage was still teaching the class calmly as if nothing had happened, Mo Fei could clearly feel that many parents next to her had turned their heads to look at her. Mo Fei felt that her face was burning, and she was so embarrassed. What sin did she commit today? Her daughter did not want her mother to accompany her. She wanted her father. Her little brother did not like to sit in his mother's lap, yet he insisted on sitting with sister. Murphy suddenly felt very tired. She wanted to ask Yang Yi for a hug. Fortunately, when Cece saw this, she took the initiative to move her butt and make some space for little Swanee. Murphy was also afraid that Tong Tong would cry and make a scene, which would make it impossible for the teacher to continue the class, so she had no choice but to let go of him. I'll let you be for now. Let's go home. I'm worried about your butt. Little Momo didn't care about the future. Now that he could finally sit beside his sister in satisfaction, a smile appeared on his little face. In order to make room for Tong Tong, Shishi only sat with half of her but on the chair. After glancing at her little brother, she did not care about Tong Tong anymore. She quickly placed her hands on the desk and listened attentively. Little Momo stood at the side and glanced at his sister. He imitated her and placed his hands on the desk. He straightened his back and peeked his little head out. He didn't know what he was looking at, but he was imitating his sister. He was doing it quite happily, with a bright smile on his little mouth. Did all the children prepare for our lesson? I would like to invite a child to read our new question. Who is willing to give it a try? Li Ruolin asked from the podium. This was the first time Li Ruolin had asked a question in class. So many children were nervous. In the entire classroom, only Chao Ruolin and Shishi raised their hands. Li Ruolin split the question into two parts, and asked them to read one part each. Chao Ruolin started first. Shishi waited until she finished reading before she stood up from her seat. Since Tong Tong was sitting on the chair, Shishi could not push her chair back. She leaned sideways and stood up between her and Lu Xiaoyu. Yup, it was a little uncomfortable to sit with Tong Tong. After she stood up, she could not help but reach behind her to scratch her butt. Then she hurriedly picked up her textbook and read aloud. Drink goose gourd, Weden Sheng, eat lotus root ugliness. The young lady read every word with perfect articulation and tried hard to form the shape of her mouth. Tong Tong did not understand what his sister was doing. Why did she stand up? Why did she say such strange things in front of so many people? However, Tong Tong could not help but turn his head and look at his sister in shock. After a while, the confusion in his eyes disappeared and was replaced by deep admiration. Wow, my sister is amazing. Of course, even if you asked Tong Tong how his sister was amazing, he would not be able to figure it out. Anyway, his sister was amazing. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.